their seats. We're just about ready to get underway. Yeah, right. My co-chair has the gavel, and I have the loud voice.
Is it morning still? Nope.
Nope, so is that...
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy holidays. Thank you for joining us today for the DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee meeting. For our court reporter and any new guests, I am Mignon Moore from the District of Columbia, and along with Jim Roosevelt from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I chair and he co-chairs the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee. As we begin, please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, justice for all. We are joined today by our illustrious chairman. As a point of personal privilege, I'd like to thank Chairman Harris for all he's done this last 4 years, and in particular this last year as we went through convention and the election. And we're pleased to have some remarks from him today. And as his tenure as chair comes to a close, let's give him a big round of applause and thank him for his service.
Thank you all. Thank you. As I like to say, if a black man could blush. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And hello, everybody. I am very, very excited to be here with all of you. And, you know, as my time as chair comes to a close, I do want to take this moment to say thank you. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for your dedication to our party. Thank you for fighting for the American people. And I really want to say thank you to this committee. I want to thank you all for the historic work you have done as a committee, the Bylaws Committee of the Democratic National Committee. This group took on 2 unprecedented efforts: making modifications to the presidential calendar to bring in diverse voices early in the presidential primary calendar. And when President Biden stepped aside, it was this committee that defined a fair, transparent, and swift process by which we would select our new nominee. No other RBC has ever had to take on the challenges quite like that, let alone to have 2 of them in the same year. And so this work matters. Every member of this committee is so crucial and so important. It embodies the values of our Democratic Party. Let's not forget to acknowledge that for the first time ever, because of your work, 4 of the 5 early states that you all selected had black women chairs represent them in the presidential primary process. That's because of the work that you all did. And I want to commend you on your professionalism, your thoroughness, but most importantly, that you always put this party first. I also want to extend my deepest gratitude to our co-chairs, Jim Roosevelt, and Mignon Moore. Yes.
You see, I can blush.
Jim, Jim and Mignon represent the best of this party, because you can't find two people who are more fair or more conscientious and who understand the rules of this party, and they love this party as much as these two. And it has been the joy of my tenure to be able to work hand in glove with Jim and Mignon over these 4 years. So I want to thank you both. Thank you for being true leaders. Thank you for guiding us throughout this election, but especially throughout this unprecedented year. Folks, from our nomination process to our convention, every single one of you was essential, and you handled important responsibilities with grace, dignity, and wisdom. We truly couldn't have done any of it without you. My friends, I know this has been a tough year, but we still have a lot to be grateful for as a party. To that end, I want to offer my gratitude to both President Biden and Vice President Harris, who led the most pro-worker administration this country has ever seen. And there's no question, at least no question for me, that President Biden really has been the most legislatively successful president of my lifetime. What's more, he not only invested in our country, but most importantly, he invested in this party, more so than I can even think of anybody else. As a party, we have much further to go and an obligation to consistently communicate our values to all Americans. But when we step back to look at all that this administration has accomplished in 4 years, it's nothing short of awe-inspiring. 4 years ago, when President Biden took office, our nation was gripped in one of the worst crises in my life, the COVID pandemic. Under his leadership, we built back better, stood up for workers, and invested in America, and most importantly, the American people. And in just 4 years, this administration created more than 16 million jobs, achieved the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years, took on big pharma and capped prescription drug costs, protected 1.2 million union pensions, boosted for the middle class. There's no question that this administration fought and delivered for working families. And as for our Democratic nominee, I had a front row seat as Vice President Harris led not only in the last 4 years, but in her historic 107-day campaign. You know, the true measure of a person is not how they act in good times, but how they perform in challenging times. Vice President Harris led with grit and unfailing commitment to the American people. As chair of this party, I am so grateful for the Vice President. And I thank her for every single day for standing up for all of us in the face of challenges and divisions. And we know there's more work to be done, my friends. I know the outcome is not what any of us had hoped for. But from the policy wins we achieved to the competitive down-ballot races we won despite historic headwinds, we have this group right here to thank. When I stood side by side with our RBC co-chair and convention chair, Mignon Moore, in Chicago, when we gavelled in the convention and looked out at everything that we accomplished, I was so overcome with emotion and so incredibly proud to be the chair of our party. This party that is 176 years old, the oldest living party on the face of this planet. My friends, working with all of you has been such an honor and privilege, and when I think back to these last 4 years, it's your hard work, it's your passion, and your commitment that I will remember. Now, my friends, we're facing the future of our party and paving the way for our next chair. I have announced the initial parameters for the election of the next slate of DNC officers. We will hold 4 forums in January and have the election on February 1. My staff and I are working hard to make sure that the team inherits a strong, focused, and robust organization that's in good financial standing. Over the past 4 years, I've spent a lot of time telling you that our work isn't done. Well, here I am again, telling you that our work is never done. You will be critical in running this process smoothly and transparently so that we can build upon our successes and prepare for 2025, 2026, and beyond. We do this work not for ourselves, but for the next generation. You know, we are not starting from scratch, my friends. The work we've done as a party to build our infrastructure means that we are better prepared to take on the opposition and win the next political fights that are just around the corner. Our success is linked to holding the Trump administration and MAGA Republicans accountable for the harms they will inflict on the American people and recapturing the support of voters across all 57 states and territories. That means that we can't just focus on politics. We must also be centered and integrated into the betterment of the community. That is the path forward for Democratic Party success, centering the people, understanding what working families need, and delivering relentlessly day after day. We cannot be simply a political organization. We must be a community organization, focused on addressing the daily needs, hopes, dreams, and fears of the American people. And my friends, that starts with you and the work we do today and every day going forward. I know you will succeed, and I am so incredibly proud of the work that we did together and the work that we have yet to come. Thank you all again for everything, and thank you for allowing me to be your chair these last 4 years.
Sir, before we move on, can I ask the chairman, first of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm like furniture. I just sit. First of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your eloquent words, and thank you to our co-chairs for their leadership. There are no words that can describe the efforts that took place when our president made the decision to step back and our vice president stepped up. And we know what took place, not just at the convention, but also over the 107 days of her historic campaign. As 2024, some of us can't look in the rearview mirror without figuring out what happened. How did it happen? What did we do right? And there are plenty of things we can put down on a piece of paper, but what did we do wrong? Why did we fall behind? What was the target and what was the message and who heard us and who didn't hear us? So I guess my question to you, Mr. Chairman, is will a postmortem take place at any point over the next 2 months as we prepare to elect new officers? And if so, are we going to look outside the box or look outside the room? And when I say the room, the big Democratic Party, to get some expert analysis on everything from propaganda to, targeting to digital, everything. If we don't look at everything, then in 690 days from today, which is the date of the 2026 midterm election, and I'm not ignoring New Jersey and Virginia and all of the mayoral races that we face in 2025. But my basic question is, are we going to conduct a very thorough forensic examination of the 2024 electoral season? And will we do it with the current officers, and we have several around the table, or will we wait until the spring of 2025? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. One of the things that we have started internally at the DNC is reviewing the things that we control at the DNC. As you all know, when you have a presidential campaign, there's a campaign, and there's the organization of the DNC. And so we've been evaluating the programs that we ran, the things in which we cooperated and coordinated with state parties on, so as to lay the foundation for a much more thorough analysis, or, and I hate postmortem. I like that.
I don't like autopsies.
No, I don't like that either.
So give it
a
another
review,
name.
a review. And so we're laying the foundation for that. We're also waiting in order to get all of the voter file data that, as you know well, sometimes that takes a minute. And so to do a thorough analysis, you got to get all of the data to analyze who voted, where did they vote, and the like. And so we're laying the foundation for that. But because we're going to have this chair's race probably earlier than we normally have it, I don't think that process will be done by the time we get to the chair's race. And so when we hand over the keys, then the hope is that the next chair and the new officers will continue the process of really bringing in the experts. One of the things that we hope to do for the meeting that we have coming up at the end of January, 1st of February, is also to bring in some pollsters to begin to give you all a sense of what they saw, some of the analysis that they have done and conducted, particularly as it looking at various members of the coalition that make up the Democratic Party. One of the things that I'm very interested in particular, are black men and Latino men, and the performance there, and what and how they were impacted by the campaign. So a lot of those things are being discussed, or in motion right now internally. But I think a lot of this, the bulk of it, and when a report will come out, that will be something that the next chair will probably have to inherit.
Thank you so much. And since you're adding men, put all young men, period, all young women, period, but the entire electorate. In terms of the 4 forums, are they all in person, or is it a combination of in-person and hybrid?
Well, we've announced that we'll do 2, I think 2 in person and then 2 virtual. Yeah, is that right? Combination, yeah. And so, but people who are at home.
Are they regional?
No, so we're not doing the regional as we did it the last time around.
I just want to go on the record. I only have 1 vote, but I support regional meetings, regional conversations. I believe what we did in the aftermath of 2016 allowed us to hear from voters from every walk of life, and we also had the ability to have it live streamed. Some media people picked it up, but it gave us an opportunity to go back to the people and to really have a dynamic process. And again, if the decision has been made, I understand, but I just have an opportunity to add my voice on a Thursday. The day is Thursday? Yeah, because sometimes I add my voice on a Sunday.
Well,
and I'm not talking about the Lord and the Jesus Christ in the church, because I do something else during those times. But I'm just saying that I think the American people and those who, for whatever reason, didn't show up, if we have an opportunity to listen and to get their input and to allow them to hear the voices of the people who want to lead us out of this moment, I think we need to open that door as wide as we can. And if it calls upon us to raise a few more dollars, well, what's a few more dollars when we've already raised $1 billion plus? So give the people an opportunity. I hate to see my region, a region of the country that often get ignored in presidentials. I would hate to see people in the South, in those red states in the middle. I would hate to see that they don't have an opportunity to say something to us. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to also echo what Mignon and Jim said, but the fact that you put money in those states, the fact that you figured out how to give money in those red states, it may have planted a seed for 2026 and beyond. So thank you for that, but give everybody an opportunity to hear from all of these great candidates. I see some of them in the room today. Well, they need to go and see some of the folks that you and I grew up with. They need to hear from them. And we need to give them that chance. So that I just want to throw that out. And if you need me to go on the soapbox and raise $5 more. I thought the other day, I said, damn, I gave the DNC $350 on the Sunday before the election. What was I thinking?
Well, you
But
were
I'm
thinking,
okay.
thoughts.
I'm okay. I'm okay. And I'm willing to give you another $350 or $250 maybe.
Well,
Just give the people a little bit more of what they want, which is to hear from us, and we need to listen to them. Thank you, and I yield back to balance at the time you never gave me.
I'm happy to address that because I also went through, I know you put on the forms, but I was a candidate in those forms as well. And one of the things that we have to do is many of these candidates are going to be invited to a lot of forums over the course of the next month. And because we had to shorten the window, originally we were looking at having the election later on in February, but it would have cost another $250,000 to just do that because of hotels and the like and the food and beverage. And it was my assessment that I'd rather have that $250,000 in the bank for the next chair and the administration to use in terms of reaching out to voters and communicating with voters and building operation and investing in state parties than just another conference room with a few of us all gathered. So that was sort of the assessment. We are going to make sure that people from around the country can participate. That they can have their voices heard, that they can provide their input, and then there are going to be additional forums that the members will participate in, or the candidates around the country also.
Thank you, Chair Brazil, and thank you, Chair Harrison. This is a little preview of a discussion that we're going to be having, and I think it's important for all of us. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's our pleasure to be here with you. To begin with, I'd like to recognize our distinguished parliamentarian, Helen McFadden, to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Applebaum?
Present.
Ms. Blanco?
Presente.
Ms. Brazil? Here. Mr. Brennan?
Present.
Ms. Cardona has given her proxy to Ms. Daughtry. Mr. Curry? Ms. Daughtry? Ms. Desai-Martin has given her proxy to Mr. Leon. Ms. Dowdell?
Present.
Mr. Elete? Here. Ms. Fowler? Here. Mr. Uridia?
Here.
Mr. Jones has given his proxy to Mr. Elete. Ms. Kmark? Here. Mr. Leon? Here. Ms. Lewis has given her proxy to Ms. Kmark. Ms. McGarrick has given her proxy to Ms. Williams. Mr. Martin? Here. Mr. McDonald?
Here.
Mr. McGlinchey? Mr. Mitchell?
Here.
Mr. Ray? Here. Mr. Saunders? Here. Mr. Spate? Here. Ms. Swecker? Mr. Thompson? Here. Ms. Weingarten? Here. Ms. Williams? Here. Mr. Chairman, you have almost everybody. You certainly have a quorum.
Thank you, Helen. As everyone knows, per our charter and bylaws, a quorum is constituted by 40% of RBC members or 14 members present in person or by proxy, so we certainly have a quorum. Having gotten used to seeing each other essentially monthly over the past year or more, it feels like ages since we've been last together. But I was delighted to see you all at our historic convention in August. It was a phenomenal event led by our incredible co-chair, our own Mignon Moore. Let's give her a big round of applause. The convention was a big highlight for Democrats this cycle, and that's no small part because of your creativity and dedication, Mignon. Thank you for your leadership. And thank you, members, for the hard work you completed to ensure we had representative delegations to send to the convention. All in all, I think we had a very smooth cycle process-wise, and I'm grateful for your contributions. As Mignon will share when she reviews today's agenda, we'll discuss the cycle a bit at the end of today's meeting. But to start us off, I want to situate the committee responsibilities for the upcoming months. As you are aware, members of standing committees, such as this one, are appointed by the chair of the DNC at the second meeting the year after a presidential election. Essentially, a new chair is elected at the first meeting, as you know. Then that chair, in consultation with the executive committee, will select members of each of the standing committees to be ratified by the DNC at the second meeting next year. Current committee members who are still DNC members will serve until the second meeting of 2025. The newly formed committee will be charged with responsibilities as defined in our government documents, all of which you are very familiar with. The RBC selected next year will conduct a review of the charter and bylaws, consider any properly received amendments, consider the temporary rules of the National Convention to be included in the call to the convention, and determine the process for states to generate their delegate selection plans. This process will also include the early window for the 2028 primary, if they determine there is an early window, and the process by which to determine those states. Those decisions will be the responsibility of the 2025 to 2029 RBC. The RBC will meet again to determine the rules of procedure for electing at-large DNC members, but by and large, the work of this RBC will be largely concluded. As we reach the end of this journey, I'd like to truly thank all of you again for your meaningful contributions, your thoughtful dialogue, and your collaborative disposition. It has been such an honor and a pleasure to serve as your co-chair alongside Mignon, and I am grateful to have this experience with you. Mignon?
Thank you, Jim. I'd also like to start by expressing my gratitude for your time, wisdom, and participation. This committee dealt with unprecedented challenges and unique issues, but always prioritized transparency, fairness, and equity in every solution. Our work together has made the party stronger, and I thank you for that. Today, we'll focus on two topics. First, recommending the draft rules of procedure for the officers' election for the DNC to vote upon on February 1st. Helen will walk us through the rules of procedure, which are based on the 2017 document, but incorporate some of the advancements we developed in 2021. Second, we will discuss the 2024 convention and delegate selection process. As Jim explained, beyond the rules of procedures needed for next year, our decision-making work is largely concluded. Our discussion about the 2024 process will provide a foundation of understanding for our successors, but we will not make any decisions on their behalf. Are there any questions before we begin consideration of the 2025 rules of procedures for the election of officers? If not, I'll turn it back to Jim.
Thank you, Mignon. As Mignon said, our main point of business today is to recommend the rules of procedure for the election of Democratic National Committee officers for approval by the full Democratic National Committee on February 1, 2025. You were previously sent a draft of the rules of procedure, which may also be found in your member folder today. We will ask first for a motion to recommend the rules of procedure to the DNC for adoption. This will allow us to begin discussion. Following the motion, I will ask Helen and our DNC counsel, Andy Levine, to provide an overview of the rules of procedure, inclusive of any big points or changes from previous cycles. Is there a yes, Stuart? Okay. You just answered the question I was about to ask, which was, is there a motion to recommend the draft rules? And we have a second. The rules of procedure have been offered and seconded. The floor is open for discussion by members, but I'd ask that Helen and Andy first walk us through the document. Helen, will you provide us with an overview of the rules of procedure, and Andy will then explain any recommended changes to our past process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These rules are based on prior rules used successfully. They have been always, and certainly are now, designed to be neutral. These rules cover all of the important parts of running an election. The nominations, how you get nominated and when you get nominated. The election itself, how much speaking time you will have, in what order you will have it. And then there is a provision in here so that it will not have to be adopted at a later point regarding vacancies. Obviously, that vacancy set of provisions is not going to apply in the elections in February. And then this contains a segment describing the voting itself. So nothing in here is flashy or new. It's old, tried, and true stuff. This contemplates using a paper or an electronic ballot. You will see the use of the word roll call a couple of times, but when you get to the general section, subpart 4B, you clearly see that roll call and ballot voting are being equated here, okay? You will see the language picked up from the Charter and Bylaws with regard to gender division and non-binary. And you will see that these are majority elections. And unlike the usual rule, a quorum for this meeting is 50%, not 40%. But again, that's been consistent over time. The other thing that is picked up in here and has been repeated over and over in our rules is the ability to change the office for which you initially signed up. That's not new. These rules give you a procedure for doing that and a time at which that can be done. So that's my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Helen. Andy, did you want to add some thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Helen. Yes, so these rules are a continuation of our past practice for many cycles, but there are a few modifications and improvements that the co-chair and staff are recommending. First, just like in 2021, we have set the date that nominating petition signatures are due to 7 days before the election rather than 4, to give our membership a concrete picture of the field a week before the election and to give staff sufficient time to prepare for the conduct of the election. Because candidates will already be collecting signatures to participate in our candidate forums, this deadline should not be burdensome to any viable campaign. And additionally, just like in 2021, we have set the signature threshold to 40 rather than 20 in longer ago elections, which will allow for a broad array of candidates to qualify while still setting a meaningful threshold for ballot access. As a reminder, DNC members are permitted to sign more than one nominating petition for each office if they wish, and we currently have 448 members eligible to vote in this election. Additionally, in keeping with the committee's commitment to inclusivity, we have removed unnecessarily gendered language from the rules and have also added language to Section 2C5 about the treatment of gender non-binary candidates for the purposes of equal division, which mirror the language you adopted for the delegate selection rules this cycle. Next, the rules of procedure to fill vacancies for officer positions have traditionally been passed at the second meeting after a presidential election. But because these procedures are germane to the election of officers, we have incorporated them into these rules of procedure as Section 3 and have removed provisions of this language where redundant with the general rules in Section 4. Additionally, on occasion during past elections, there have been negotiations between candidates to change offices they are seeking to allow for a smoother election process among the qualified candidates. This has happened in several cycles before, but has never been incorporated into the rules explicitly. If there is an interest in following this practice this year, we recommend ensuring that the procedures for that are clear. This language, added to Section 4A2, allows for candidates to withdraw from one office and run for another if they notify the chair before the elections of both their original and new offices. Language has been added to Section 4B1 to ensure flexibility for the time allotted for voting, in case it's taking a little longer or shorter than expected. And we have also lengthened the warning time to 30 seconds before a vote ends rather than 10 to make it more useful to members. We've added language to Section 4B3 to allow for elections to occur while other elections are occurring at the same time. In the past, we've done this through a suspension of the rules, but this language helps us save time without conducting a vote to suspend the rules for what's become a standard practice. Clarifying language has been added to Section 4B4 to reflect that campaigns will be able to review election results after the election rather than after each ballot, as was the practice in 2017. And finally, per Section 4C, proxies are now required rather than requested 24 hours ahead of the vote, though there is a carve-out for extenuating or unavoidable circumstances. As I understand it, this is currently the Secretary's office's practice, and this will help speed up the count process, as resolving proxies is the most time-intensive component of the vote counting process each election. And that's it. Those are the major changes. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Andy and Helen. Do any members have any questions or thoughts you'd like to share? Elaine.
Yeah. I'd like to go back to the statement signed by the threshold of 40 DNC members, okay? It strikes me that, first of all, a DNC member can sign more than one petition. So this makes it extremely easy for people to get into the race. And I'd like to suggest that we look to our long-standing delegate selection rules, where the threshold has been 15% for getting a delegate. And I think it makes sense to make this consistent with the delegate selection rules. Right now, this 40 signatures is only 0.89 of the entire DNC. It's just a very small number. I've been thinking,
For people's perspective, there are 448
48.
current DNC members, and they may sign for multiple offices.
they must stand for multiple offices, that's right. And that I think is fine. But, you know, I've been thinking about this ever since we got into the business of sponsoring presidential debates. And one of the things that happens when the threshold is too low, and we as Democrats are always wanting to be inclusive, so that's like one of our good things. But what happens when the threshold is too low is you don't have time to hear the serious candidates. I'm always drawn back to the 2020 debates before COVID hit, where the party really deserved a better discussion of Medicare for all versus the expansion of Obamacare. And they didn't get it. They didn't get it because there were just too many people on that stage, frankly, who had no reasonable chance of getting the nomination. And I think it hurts democracy when you really are just splintering your time and splintering your attention. Anyway, this is a fairly modest proposal, but I would suggest increasing the 40 to 66. I'm sorry, the number is 67 votes, which gives us 15%. People could still, you know, sign more than one petition, but it makes it consistent with our delegate selection rules. And I think that that's something that we would want to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, that was the first topic of discussion that I was going to bring up, so we've moved ahead. And we will have an appropriate time for amendments shortly. I also want to point out that not only are members permitted to sign for multiple offices, they can sign for multiple candidates for the same office. The test is, in effect, do I want to support this person being able to be on the ballot? as opposed to do I want to support this person for the final vote. So that raises the question for discussion. Would anyone else like to discuss this question right now? Ms. Fowler?
I've had this, this whole discussion in my mind for a week since I started signing people's petitions, and I've probably signed 10, and several of them running for the same office. Why do, and I'm not arguing with it, but I just don't remember, why do we let people sign more than one petition for the same office? Are we just being nice? That's so unlike us, just to be nice.
You know, as someone who signs a lot of petitions, but I haven't signed one this time, it's good. I mean, you're able to sign as many you're helping someone run for office. And what better way to demonstrate that we support democracy than to give everybody an equal chance to go out there and get as many signatures from the DNC members. So, and clearly they have our names in our list. I've gotten multiple emails. At first I was getting all the emails wanting my money. Now they want my signature. So let's have at it.
And I don't know, I'm not sure whether my microphone was on when I said a few minutes ago that up to now anyway, the signature has been a question of, will people be allowed to run? Not do I support that person for the office in the final count. So that's the rationale. Whether that's what we want or not is up to this body. Yes.
Right. So is that just an eligibility? So it's just that we deem you eligible. That's all we're doing. You're eligible to run.
That's all it does. That's it. You got it.
To qualify.
Okay.
Any other comments or discussion on this question? David McDonald.
Couple things. If we were to do this, it might make more sense to actually express it as a percentage of the membership of the DNC rather than a number, in part because 67 is not actually 15% of the 448. It would take 68, so you get this little confusion. But second, that raises the question of when do you determine who the members of the DNC are who are going to vote in this election? You know, when is it still permissible to fill a vacancy in a DNC seat and then be seated, particularly if we need proxies 24 hours or whatever ahead of time to process all this stuff? I'm a little sensitive to it because when the DNC decided to schedule the election February 1st, they stepped on top of the state committee meeting in my state where we were electing our chair, so now we've had to rearrange that, and the processing, it changes the vacancies coming up the line of elections. So it seems to me that as a general cleanup, we might also want to put a cutoff date for which if there's, you know, the list is locked in terms of who's going to be able to vote, and in particular notify our collateral organizations that if you're going to do...
who's going to be able to run?
No, who's going to be able to vote in the election, who the DNC members are that will be entitled to vote. It doesn't affect the 200 or so that are elected because they have to be elected during the calendar year, but our auxiliary and allied organizations at the moment can drop in an hour ahead of time and say we've decided to change who our representative is and create a new person, and that may be a problem in a close election. At least it's not particularly transparent if people are finding out that they're new voters. You know, in 2017, the election was effectively decided as a half vote election, it seems to me. And that first ballot was a one vote or something. It was very, very close. It was close enough that a couple of votes difference might have changed an outcome because of the tendency of whoever's in front on the first ballot to pick up more votes than whoever is second when the things sort out. So I think we might want to think about clarifying it if we go down the road that Elaine is talking about. With respect to the actual issue, it does kind of concern me that people started this election thinking it might be 20 signatures they needed. And then we roll out the proposed rules and it's 40. And then we come to the meeting.
The last time we did this process, it was 40.
Yes, but I suspect many people were not paying as close attention to the last one as they were 2017.
Well, that's on them. But
Yes, I take the point, but my point is, it could feel a little bit like a moving target, that every time there's a meeting, the number of signatures that you need to get nominated goes up. And I'm not saying I wouldn't agree with Elaine on the concept, but I would at least think about whether this is something we should be recommending for the future as opposed to changing while candidates are out getting the petition signatures.
So I'm told by people who are better at math than I am, or who got to their computers first, that 15% of the current DNC membership is 67.2. Normally 0.2 you'd round down, but when you're looking for a minimum number, you round up. So that's 68 signatures. So just to make sure we're all in agreement on that number. Yeah. Okay. Any further? Yes, Frank.
Yeah, just another consideration on this. And first of all, thank you for all the work that y'all have done on these rules. It's really good. We talked about these forums, and I don't see it set out in the rules. Maybe it's just will be a DNC policy, which is fine in terms of participation in the forum. But I think we've talked about having the same number required for participation in the forum as required for nomination. But since the fora are occurring in January, prior to January 25th, if we raise the limit, what we're essentially saying is you need to get these 68 signatures by a much earlier date than January 25th. I'm not sure what that date is, but I didn't know if that was something else people might want to consider in setting the limits.
Mr. Saunders?
Before you go on.
Sorry.
Sure. I just wanted to address that quickly, Frank. We've communicated to candidates that it's 40 signatures. We've let them know that the rules of procedure are not final until you all pass them and the DNC votes on it. But for the purposes of the forums only, it would remain 40 signatures. So it doesn't feel like a rug pull to them for that aspect.
So people will be able to qualify for the forum before they're qualifying to be candidate?
Potentially, yes.
Needs to be because the forums take place before the final adoption of the rules of procedure. Mr. Saunders and then Mr. Leon. Okay.
Yeah,
Pardon me?
Yeah. Lee?
Lee?
No? Oh.
No?
Oh, Leah.
Oh, Leah. I'm sorry. I was told.
Okay, sorry.
I was told it was Lee. Okay.
No problem.
Bishop Daughtry?
We get mixed up all the time.
We get mixed up all the time.
Oh, yeah, right.
Thank you, Mr. All the time. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. I would just offer, as the person who managed the election in 2017.
Is your microphone on?
It is on. It is
Okay.
on. I had the privilege, or I suppose, of managing the election in 2017 and overseeing the voting and that. So I would just offer one thing about the proxies. It wasn't the proxies in advance that caused delays. It was the proxies of members who had to leave at that day, and the shifting and also. So as you're creating your process, it wasn't having them in advance. Those were not the problem. It was the people who had to catch planes, who had to do other things, and managing that on-site minute of proxy challenge as people were swapping and figuring out who could carry their vote. And that was the tedious process, and in some cases held up the next balloting because we were on paper ballots. The electronic system failed that day.
Ms. Weingarten?
Thank you. I just want to go back to the proposal about whether we increase the signatures. I think it's a great idea, and I think we shouldn't do it. And I think we shouldn't do it because this process has started already. And I don't disagree with, let me say it in a positive way. I agree with Donna that we do have to be reflective about what happened in this election. Now, a lot of people from around this table and in this room worked extraordinarily hard. And I think we have to actually separate hard work from results. But one of the things that's going on is that the party is, from the, macro data that we've seen, we lost a bunch of people who, many of us believe is the Democratic Party. And that's workers, and that's people who are the rank and file people who are part of the DNC. People don't get together very often. It's hard to get, even though we think it's easy to get signatures, it's kind of hard to get signatures because people are all over the country. So I think that we should not be in a situation where we're looking to increase a threshold on a nominating statement, and I think we should stick with where it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add one more thing?
All right,
Mr.
Mr. Leon?
Yeah, I think if we're going to have the threshold for participating in the forums at 40, having a different threshold for the participating on the ballot seems to me it might cause confusion. And I think at this point, we should just stick with 40 across the board. Next time, certainly maybe take a look at it, but having a different threshold for participation in the forum and a higher threshold for being on the ballot just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Secretary Ray? No?
It's
Bishop
me
Daughtry?
again. We never get confused.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm getting confused here, but anyway.
And I agree with Randy's remarks, and this takes me back to Donna's earlier point about the forums. If the point is for us to increase participation, it seems to me that having 4 regional forums, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, 4 regional forums where DNC members can actually get together and see the candidates in person would be consistent with what Randy just said about people being able to get together, talk, interact, and make the best decision for the forward movement of our party.
Anyone else on this topic? So we're going to go to one more, I'm going to raise one more topic, and then I'm going to ask if anyone has a specific amendment to the rules as proposed and moved earlier. If they do, we'll vote up or down on the amendment, and then we'll go to vote on the full proposal. Everyone clear? Okay. So the other topic is allowing candidates to run for offices other than those they were nominated for. As you can see in the nomination section, we've added language to more clearly allow for candidates to run for offices other than those they were nominated for. This has sometimes happened in the past during candidate negotiations and as ballots have played out, and we wanted to account for it in our rules, but we'd like to see if anyone has any thoughts or comments about that. That appears to be uncontroversial. All right. So since we don't have any further, oh, yes, David.
Sorry. Yeah, Jim, I did have a couple of additional comments on the rules. Generally, previously it sounded like you were trying to limit it to the discussion of number of signatures. With respect to the equal division provision that we have in these rules, I guess I want to flag maybe for the next RBC that what we have in these rules and have used in the past is not the same as what we say in the charter. In the charter, what we say is that the officers other than the chair should be equally divided to the extent practicable. And here we have added an additional exclusion for the ASDC chair. I think we can interpret our existing documents to get there by simply saying, because we don't control when the ASDC election is, it's not practicable to consider to put them in, but it would be less confusing if we actually made our bylaws map to the exclusion we're doing here. So it's a comment to note.
You're not proposing different language for these rules. You're raising a flag about reconciling with the charter when the new RBC does its overall review.
For its 4-year review, yes. And then my second comment actually pertains to the, well, I mean, I take that back. I also have a question before I get to the last comment. We're making a change in the process by which people have access to the results of the rounds of voting, as I understand it, to make it after each election as opposed to after each ballot. That strikes me as having a potentially significant impact on the campaigns themselves, them not being able to see at an intervening stage who voted for, say, a candidate who's dropped in the last round. I mean, whose votes are now up for grabs. And I guess I'm wondering why we're doing that. I assume it's for efficiency, but is it really worth the cost if it interferes with people's ability to consolidate support?
So Bishop Daughtry and I could both comment on this. Trying to, as the election was conducted in 2017, trying to keep the process moving, and that was by its nature lengthy, it was determined in applying the rules then that the review of the ballots was after the election, not between each round of voting. That was disputed, and nonetheless it was held to. In preparing this draft, Mignon and I came to the conclusion we should reflect what was actually done in the past. If people want to do it differently, we can do it differently, but they should recognize that if we take the time for various candidates to examine the actual ballots in each round, it's going to be a long day, night, week, whatever.
Mm-hmm. And then my last comment or question, looking at the proxy provision that we're talking about, I'm greatly sympathetic to the Secretary's office position about wanting them 24 hours in advance. I've seen in a contested election in the Western Caucasus how much work it takes to validate proxies when the election's under challenge. And having all that work done in advance and the material available is very good. But what concerns me about the provision that we are addressing at this point is two things. We're giving the chair of the election discretion to decide whether, effectively discretion to decide whether people can give proxies the day of the election, which may or may not, in a close election, determine the outcome. If extenuating circumstances are deemed by a chair to not be, I booked my plane flight too early and now I've got to leave, so I want to give a proxy, or a different chair may say, looking at who the person's going to vote for, yeah, I think plane flights are extenuating circumstances. Certainly in past elections, in past DNC meetings, members assume that if they have to run off to the airport, and it's a bigger burden for those of us who have nonstops across the country than it is for people who are going to catch a commuter flight somewhere, have assumed that they would be able to leave a proxy with somebody if necessary, and that's no longer really guaranteed. So I hope we give some thought. I do not have an amendment. I hope we give some thought to clarifying what would constitute a minimum, maybe including but not limited to conflicts if we're going to go this route. That said, I'm sympathetic to Leah's comment a moment ago that what caused the problem is, in fact, the day of election proxies, and maybe what we want to do is say we're not even going to allow those, but that's a policy decision. I'm just making comments at this point rather than an amendment, but it does strike me as a lot of discretion for a chair in a controversial situation on the one hand, and potentially an amendment that doesn't really solve the problem that it's intended to solve, because it's not really addressing where the problem comes up. Thanks.
So I'm going to clarify one thing, and I'll be right back to you, but that's it, that under the procedure in 2017 and the way we've written it now, candidates and everybody at the meeting is informed of the outcome of each round of vote, the total result, but not of the person by person vote. Okay, Frank.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments, questions. In section 1, election of national chairperson, I was confused about the use of the term roll call, but I understand that roll call means electronic or paper ballot roll call, not standing roll call. So if that's clear to everybody, I think we can leave it as it is, but otherwise maybe.
You're correct, and that's on the record.
Okay, cool. Also in section C of election of national chairperson, it talks about dropping the lowest candidate beginning on the third ballot. Has there been consideration to dropping the lowest candidate after the first ballot, which might expedite the process?
If your question is, did we consider that, the answer is yes. Has this body considered that? The answer is no. Would you like to have that considered?
Yeah, I think so. It seems that doing it after the first ballot would expedite the process. But if there's a reason to wait to the third, I'm happy to hear what that is.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
And then I have comments about a different section.
Okay. We'll come back to that when we get back to specific amendments.
Okay.
To David's point about the proxies, since I believe I recall that the number of votes you need is dependent on votes in person and by proxy. So clarifying David's question would be important, because if the discretion is to the chair, whether the proxy will be presented or not, it could change the number of votes needed for a candidate to be successful. If the chair rules that the proxy is not being accepted for whatever reason, it lowers the voting pool, which changes the number, which means every ballot, then the number is changed. And so we may want to not have as much leeway in that, in deciding whose proxy is acceptable and whose is not.
Any other questions or comments? All right, so what we have in front of us, Helen, correct me if I'm wrong, is a motion and a second to adopt the rules of procedure as proposed and distributed for this meeting. Would anyone like to make a specific motion to amend those proposed rules of procedure? Frank.
Okay. So I've got two things, I think. The first one is to...
Take them one at a time.
Yeah, okay. The first one then would be to, since we talked about it, is to change dropping the lowest candidate on the third ballot to the first ballot.
So dropping those who received the fewest number of votes on the second ballot, beginning on the second ballot rather than on the third ballot, is what you're proposing. Is there a second for that motion? We have a motion and a second to change the language in Rule 1C2 to change at the end of 2, change the word third to second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Oh, hold on. We have questions or comments here.
Just a question on why was third in the first place, just to have some clarification on that.
Why the
Why the third ballot? Just how did we get there?
So in the discussion I can summarize, I think, the discussion in the past, that some people want to see where things sort out on the first ballot and then have a chance to vote for the same or different people on the second ballot. That's why it's written the way it is now. What Frank's proposed is people understand what they're doing. Let's just move right along.
Copy
So,
that.
fair summary?
Yep.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. So we have an amendment to change the word third to the word second, as you see on the screen. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. We have changed the word. Frank,
Mr.
your
Chair,
next proposal.
I abstain.
Jason. Jason has abstained from the vote, and Ken has also abstained from the vote. I should have asked for abstentions. I apologize. Are there any other abstentions?
I will also.
Ms. Blanco is also abstaining from the vote. Anyone else? Okay. Has anyone else here seen the movie Conclave? It's a great movie, and this feels like that.
We abstain.
Yes, Joanne.
This is really a question for Frank, I guess, are you also seeking to change it in section 2C6? Section 2C6, majority election and voting if an officer is not elected. The last line, no? That would stay as third ballot? Yes.
To be consistent, we'll also
For
change
consistency.
the word
Okay.
third to second in that paragraph. Thank you. Excellent. Frank?
I have one other amendment and then a question. The other amendment is to section 4B3 on page 3 of the proposed rules under voting. And it says a vote shall be final when announced by the chair, which is fine. It says on a roll call vote, members may change their votes until the result is announced by the chair. It seems to suggest that, for example, if you're voting by written ballot, that you can send in your ballot, and then at some point during the voting, you can ask for that ballot back and submit another ballot. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I would recommend, unless I'm missing something, removing that sentence.
Is there a second for that motion? I hear a second. Any further discussion?
Was this intended to model what happens in the Congress? People can change their votes until the vote is gavelled?
I'm sorry.
What did you say?
I'll repeat it. Was this intended to model what happens, not that, well, what happens in the Congress where you can change your vote until
may have
gavelled?
been, that may at one time have been the model. That might even be before my time. Elaine, do you know? No. You know, and obviously, we've all seen that on C-SPAN, but yeah. Any further discussion or comments? All right, we will take a vote on the motion, which has been seconded, to remove that second sentence in subparagraph 3, allowing for a change of votes until the result is announced by the chair, so that that is no longer allowed. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Abstentions?
Abstention.
I see Mr. Ray, Mr. Martin, and Ms. Blanco. Any other abstentions? So the ayes clearly have it, and that section is eliminated. Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one more question. So on section 3, election to fill vacancies, that doesn't apply to this election. That applies to future elections. It just wasn't
correct.
clear to me what it was doing in our rules.
That is basically so these rules can be utilized for future elections, just to save us time, trouble, and heartache, and give people a heads up on what it'll look like. Any other amendments? Frank, David.
When we were discussing proxies a moment ago, we never really reached a conclusion, and I suspect the only way to reach a conclusion, other than doing to propose an amendment and then have it either voted up or down. And I apologize for drafting on the fly. It's not as clean as I would like it, but I would propose to, in section 4C2, strike the language that begins with the word except and ends with the word chair. That is the language that gave discretion to the chair to determine proxies, and instead substitute, except proxies may be given in person by a member to the secretary during the course of the meeting. What I'm trying to get to is the person giving the proxy must actually be there so that you know they're real, and then give it, not somebody after the fact showing up with a proxy saying, I was given this proxy. And a limited number of places that you can apply it. You can't just mail it in. You must do it in person to either the secretary or designee, in the hopes that that reduces the number of on-the-fly miscellaneous paperwork and expedites the process. It may be that it doesn't. I'm kind of putting this out for comment from the Secretary's office as well, as to whether it makes the problem worse or whether it helps something. But with that, that's my amendment and my brief comments in favor of it.
Is there a second for that amendment?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
Right.
Any?
I'm sorry, just had a question. So he said secretary or designee. Is that the language that you're proposing, or is it just the secretary?
It's not there, but I would be fine with adding or designee.
So the secretary referred to here as the person secretary at the time of the vote. So that's the current secretary until after the vote is concluded for secretary, and then it'll switch. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of this amendment, please say aye. Opposed, say no. And are there any abstentions? Mr. Martin, Mr. Ray, Ms. Blanco are all abstaining. So the motion carries. Mr. Spate.
I just want to make sure we catch one last, I think, third to second, and that is in that section 3, C2. That's the, I think that would be the third place where third ballot should be second ballot.
So whether we've done it already or not, without objection, so ordered. Any other amendments that anyone would like to propose?
I have one last one that's real quick. In the byplay that was going on when my last amendment was raised, there was a question about whether it said secretary or designee. I'm amenable to adding in designee, but I don't think we did do it, so I would like to make a further amendment to add the words or designee to the amendment I made previously. Did they put it in? All right, good. In that case, it's fine.
So again, whether that was already done or not, without objection, so ordered.
I know there's no such thing as a friendly amendment, but I appreciate the friendly amendment, so.
No such thing, but there you can do what I just did. Any other amendments? Hearing none, I will now call for a vote to recommend the rules of procedure for the election of Democratic National Committee officers.
Tanya has a question.
Just one more question. We talked about changing the number of signatures that we have, and I know that amendment hasn't been a person needs to be on the ballot or the eligibility. And I'm just curious, even if we're not voting on it for this election, do we need to consider that going forward, or are we going to be in the same place next time if we're trying to figure out whether or not we want to raise the threshold?
So there was no motion to amend these rules to reflect that. There is discussion on the record, and we always make a very strong effort, and our staff always supports us in that, to call up again the things that were previously discussed and proposed for discussion at the next round.
And just, can I further that? The reason I didn't make this into a motion is I think Frank and others had a good point that we're already in the mix, so probably not a good idea to change it now. But I do want to put down as a marker, not just for something relatively small like this, but when the next chair gets into bigger issues like who's on that debate stage, okay, that we have to bear in mind that ironically sometimes an excess of democracy undercuts democracy, especially when it keeps us scattered over a million things that have no relationship to the job at hand. And so I think we've got to bear that in mind, and that's really a sort of cautionary tale for the next round where we will have an open race.
I would almost take that, and I think this is what we're doing today and what we're doing with regard to this question of 20 versus 40 versus 68, is this committee tries to think in terms of practical effects as opposed to symbolism. So saying anybody who wants can run undercuts democracy. It makes the early stages of the process chaotic. And so there's clearly, loud and clear, a message here that next time the first draft will have a higher number in it. And that the significance to saying the first draft is that, as happened this time, when a schedule gets compressed, candidates and their campaign managers begin to look at, well, what's the proposal going to look like? Well, we're expressing a view of this committee, a sense of this committee, that next time the proposal will include a higher number, presumably 15%. And that's actually a note that's worth clarifying. 15%, whatever the number of the DNC is at that point, not 68, but 15% of the current members of the DNC at the time of the consideration of the rules of procedure. So we're saying that loud and clear. Veronica, or in a big note to her successor, will highlight that.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. So,
Mr. Chairman.
The vote. Yes, Mr. Spade.
Section 3 gives us that opportunity to do it now, to make that statement going forward for the vacancies. We could put the placeholder of 15% there.
You could make a motion to amend the rules to that effect.
Elaine? Doesn't affect this election. Correct.
Okay, so I would move that we replace. I would move that we replace 40 DNC members with the term 15% of DNC members, and just leave it at that. And then we've got it out there in the future.
And I'll second that.
So let's see how that entire paragraph reads, if we could. So, not later than 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 days before the scheduled election to fill a vacancy for national chair and or national committee officer, each candidate shall file with the secretary a nominating statement signed by 15% of DNC members and indicating the state and residence of the candidate and of such DNC members. Now, as written, that would be effective for this election, as I read it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This.
Oh, it's in the vacancy provision.
Oh.
So you change it in the vacancy provision, and that would be the early warning for the next full round. I got it. A little slow on the uptake there, but I got it now. Yes. I concur with Donna. I take everything back. Brilliant. Okay. And we had a motion and a second to make this language change to 15% for the vacancies. That's serves as a notice for 2028. Any further discussion? All those in favor of this amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. And we have abstentions from the usual people. Okay.
They're not usual. They are actually running for positions, and I applaud you.
All right, I will name
for
them.
doing it. Thank you.
Mr. Martin, Mr.
can we
Ray, and
just
Ms.
say-
Blanco. Okay.
Jim, I just want to say that I really, really hope that in 2028, nobody pays any attention to this because we'll have a Democratic president.
Thank you. All right. Any further amendments?
Mr. Chair? Over here.
Louise and
Yes.
Cheryl?
Point of information, on the issue of the proxies, what has been the traditional notification or publication or the availability of who's carrying proxies at a DNC meeting? And let me explain my question. When we are running elections, there are a number of members that are carried through proxies. Candidates do not know who has a proxy, and when we have multiple contests in a very short window, it is important to have the transparency. We know that in the individuals that are carrying proxies, that could tip the balance of this election. And I don't know what has been the practice in the past.
No. Is there anyone here who remembers? I
the
believe
proxies.
in the past, but this is based on memory of 8 years ago, which is, not very reliable. I believe in the past that the proxies were filed, first of all, in advance, but then on site, and that the candidates could ask the staff of the Secretary's office who had given a proxy to whom, but there was not a formal process for that. That's my belief.
That's right. Although I will say anecdotally that candidates had their own whip operations, so they pretty much knew who their proxies were and whether those proxies had been filed, because they were pretty savvy about that sort of counting. But there was no formal obligation of the Secretary's office team to advise a candidate or to advise anyone of any proxy that had been filed. That was between the member and the Secretary's office.
Mr. Chair, I would just advise that there could be a heightened level of transparency on the proxies that are available. Let's say other candidates that are running for vice chairs or other positions, their whip operations are sometimes less than what you would have for a chair. And I think it's in our best interest to make sure that the candidates and their campaign teams understand, how this fast-paced contest is going to move. And I would really urge that there's at least a process, either a posting or the availability of a sheet after the Secretary's office has been able to process the available proxies, and then folks are able to make that operation in a much more transparent way.
Our co-chair is suggesting to me that this transparency is in some ways accomplished by David's amendment that it has to be in person.
And I agree, I agree with Leah. I think the operations that the candidates put in place also provides a level of operation. I think the Secretary's office, and correct me if I'm wrong, Leah, will make sure that anyone that asks for this information, they will get it. I mean, it's not being withheld from anyone.
Madam Chair, I just have to, I ran in a Western Caucus chair that ended up in a tie, and it was a question about proxies and I had a whip operation, but I did not know who the actual proxies at the very end until the roll call was made. There was individuals that did know because they were commanding a good chunk of those votes. And I just want to make sure that there is at least a level of, I know if we're relying on the campaigns, well, that's a effort, but I think there is a need to just be able to post as those proxies are available, that candidates are able to have access to this list.
Thank you, Louise.
David?
I'm listening to this, I'm kind of wondering whether we might want to put maybe into a future rule, since we've already adopted these, but just a simple statement that if a candidate gives notice to the Secretary's office that they want to be kept abreast of proxy changes, that the Secretary's office will periodically issue to all of those candidates changes since the last time they gave a report on who's holding a proxy. It's some more regularized process, because what's of concern to me with what you're describing is it's very easy for an insider to tip an outsider, geez, you ought to ask for proxy update. But somebody who's new to the process has no idea that if they just asked the Secretary's office, they would get this information. And even if everything is above board, it can breed arguments about close elections. So if we regularize the process in a way that doesn't burden the Secretary's office, which is why I think it would be periodic updates as opposed to every time there's a change, you've got to send a notice out, but maybe once a day or once every few hours or something. We should do that and then make it part of the candidate form that goes out for your nominating petition. When you're saying you need 40 signatures or whatever, say also, if you want notice, you need to check this box, just as I think we're saying now with respect to the vice presidential candidates for civic engagement, you know, that they either say that they want to drop down into the other races if they lose, or they don't, but it's on the form. What I don't have is the ability to draft that complicated an amendment on the fly here, so I'm just going to note it as maybe something that between now and the actual adoption of the rules by the DNC, you know, or maybe for future succession, since by the time the rules are adopted by the DNC to be academic. But for future versions of this that we should try to draft. And urge, because all of this discussion would have had no impact whatsoever on the race that Luis was in, because it was governed by, I suspect, the rules of the Western state caucuses, that we should urge all of the caucuses to work with the Secretary's office to have a similar rule. I have great sympathy for exactly the thing that he's talking about, because it was a bit frustrating to see a state with a large number of proxies deliver them at the last minute, and only that state knew who they were. So.
Can I just add one thing? Sorry, just to your, I think that's great. Just, and I'm sure our able-bodied staff will handle this, but should we just underscore that we should prescribe the way that it should be done, like by email or something, so that it doesn't become a laborious process where somebody has to produce a paper like that and get around to people, just something to make sure that it is in fact easy and seamless.
So I think this is a question for the current secretary. Is this a practical thing to do? So in your role as current secretary, I'm going to ask Mr. Ray to comment.
It's a great question. I think one of the issues comes down to the transferability of proxies as well at the meeting, because individuals, if they are assigned more than one proxy, have to transfer, because you can only carry one proxy at a time. So I think it's just the tracking and the filing of all of those pieces would be a part of it. I'm trying to think through all the other elements that come with proxies. I know it's a laborious process for our team in general on proxies as they're coming in. But I think, Luis, your example that you made was one of the reasons we instituted some of the practices after that meeting around proxies in advance for those not on site, so that they could be known who has them and could be distributed appropriately as well, so that folks were fully aware and could collect those during that. I'd have to think more about David's point a little bit to think kind of through, and Tanya's point around what we should do with that. But you know, currently there's the electronic form of proxy that is submitted in advance of the meeting that folks can fill out. I know, for example, for the executive committee tomorrow, folks who can't be have filled that out already. And then there's the paper version of it that's done during it, and our offices, the Office of the Secretary of Staff is tracking those at the proxy table with a different, you know, with additional support staff to track where those are going, especially as they're coming in during the meeting. And I think if we look back to 17, and I was not in this position at that point, as people were leaving for the airport, other things, they were coming in quite quickly during that process. And staff was doing a phenomenal job of tracking who was assigned to what, but knowing it can move fast. I don't know, Leah, you were there. I don't know if there's anything else, Bishop.
Yeah, I would also add, and Jason and I haven't talked about this, but one of the things that is not in this committee's discussion is there was a whole set of procedures for how you interacted with the campaigns themselves. And so every campaign, we did briefings with them. They had a representative in the counting room so that people, they had the capacity to ask for that. They also had the ability to ask for, and we encouraged them, if you want to see the proxies, you can see the proxies. If you want to see the ballots, here's the point at which you can do that. And that was a whole set of presentations we did several times during the campaigning process so that every candidate's campaign was aware of the parameters and was aware of their responsibilities, but also their abilities as they were running their campaigns. So things like the proxies, we did get a lot of requests to want to know who was doing what and who's was switching. And as Jason said, that day it was coming rapid fire as people were running out to get planes, and the transferability made it quite complicated. But the campaigns knew that they had the capacity to ask. They had the capacity to have someone in the room while we were counting, one person in the room, but it was a whole set of presentations that we made several times during the campaign.
Mr. McDonald?
Yeah, to supplement my earlier comments in light of what I've been hearing, what might work would be to say that the Secretary's office, upon notice, will give periodic updates up until the cutoff time for registering the proxy in advance, if it's 24 hours in advance. But after that, it's kind of, you've got to figure it out from your whip operation. Because the essential burden is on people knowing who to ask to vote for them. You know, and if there's a lot of last minute flying, there's probably not a lot of persuasion that's going to go on with the proxies as people are running to the airport. But 24 hours ahead of time, if that's the cutoff, I would not think would be too inconvenient, since you have to have registered the transfers already. In any event, the day of, I can understand is going to be a flurry, but in any event, those are just suggestions. So,
Jim?
Yes.
I know I'm getting old, but I still have good memory. And I just verified it because I know I appointed Leah to run the election process, and according to staffers who worked before, they said we had to keep track of all of the proxies because candidates could review the ballots after the fact. And so at all times, it was updated because we knew that some of the candidates might have made the decision to read the ballot. And they also said, we also attached to the ballot that reflected it in the count. So I just wanted to concur with Bishop Daughtry was saying, and it's always nice when a Catholic girl can, you know, compliment a bishop. Thank you, love.
So again, I'm going to ask, is this for the record or is there a specific amendment? I do not hear a specific amendment. I think we've developed the record extensively.
Yes. In front of plenty of candidates, by the way.
Right. All right. Yes. Yes. So I'm back to calling for a vote to recommend the rules of procedure for the election of Democratic National Committee officers for approval by the full Democratic National Committee on February 1, 2025, as amended earlier in this meeting. All those in favor of the proposed rules as amended, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Are there abstentions? Mr. Ray, Mr. Martin, Ms. Blanco, abstain. Any further abstentions? The motion carries. All right. Happy to say that we have accomplished that part of our role today, and the Office of Party Affairs will provide an update to all candidates who've notified the Secretary's office of their intention to run. We'll present these rules of procedure to the membership at our winter meeting for their approval. And now I'm going to turn it back to my co-chair.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to the committee for all of the robust discussion around the procedures and all of the great amendments. As we have a bit more time together today, Jim and I thought it would be helpful for members to discuss the 2024 delegate selection process and convention in order to provide a record for the next iteration of the RBC. And I am going to go off script for a minute here to introduce the person that we have asked to come in. Many of you know Alex Hornbrook, but I want to say on behalf of the convention staff and myself, it was an honor and a privilege to work with you a year and a half to bring about a convention that was unprecedented. And your level of dedication, your work it's just to be commended, Alex. I mean, if I had to do it all over again, which I'm not suggesting, by the way, I could not think of a better person to work for than to work with you and to work with the team that was assembled. I also want to say, before I bring on Alex, there are many people that are sitting around this table that took off time to come and give their expertise and lend their expertise. Leah, Donna, Elaine, Jamie, of course, he was our leader. But it was so many people that just came in to help us. And I want you to give this young man a great round of applause. He did a phenomenal job, the seen and the unseen. Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you.
The floor is yours, Alex.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mignon. We're supposed to tell him about the parking space, Donna? Come on. Excuse me, losing my voice a little bit. Hazard of DC holiday party season. But thank you, everybody, for having me and all the work you did. And thank you, Mignon. I mean, well, first of all, Chicagoans were off the walls excited to have a Chicagoan chairing our convention. But our team simply would not have made it through an absolutely wild year and a half without the grace and wisdom and leadership of our chair. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And of course, be remiss to not acknowledge Chair Harrison, who right from day one of the site selection process was personally engaged. Really, all of our officers, Jason, Ken, Chris, Virginia, all engaged personally and heavily, and were extremely generous with their time and wisdom, along with, of course, Sam, Roger, Monica, all of our colleagues at the DNC gave us all of the support and guidance and friendship that we needed to be set up for success. So we're very, very grateful for all of that. And I think Mignon will agree that one thing we came to deeply appreciate and will keep in mind for future conventions is really how critical having the right local partners is for your success. And so we can never miss an opportunity to acknowledge the leadership of Governor Pritzker, Senator Duckworth, Mayors Lightfoot and Johnson, Michael Sachs, all the host committee leaders, staff. We really could not possibly have asked for better partners in the city of Chicago, state of Illinois. So that's also something we always want to highlight. We really looked at the convention as having two primary missions. We are here to conduct the vital business of our party and to build a platform for our party and for our nominee to tell their story to the voters. And we're very proud of our success on both counts. I think we were able to build an infrastructure that over the course of the week of convention and the time preceding that allowed all of our standing committees, all of our floor proceedings, which are state parties, to conduct their work effectively, efficiently, and most importantly, of course, safely. And when it came to building a platform, we were able to do that in a manner which was even more important when we then had a candidate who unexpectedly had to really reintroduce herself to the voters on a really compressed time frame. And we were successful in this convention in dominating not only in the traditional media spaces. We got tremendous ratings. Actually, our ratings outrated the Republican convention every night of the week. But we also importantly engage in a lot of experimentation and innovation across the week. I know that we're having a big discussion, obviously, across, party and society right now about how people get their information and what information they get. How do you reach people where they are? And so, we were really proud to have instituted the first ever content creator program at a convention where we credentialed 200 content creators the same way as we do traditional press. In retrospect, maybe it should have been like 2,000, but 200 was a good start. It was a sort of crazy idea when we first started it, but by bringing these folks in, giving them the same sort of access to support and information and staff as we do to traditional media, we had these 200 people who had a combined reach of 500 million followers that came and were a huge tool for us, and a tool that was also, or an opportunity, I should say, not a tool, and one that was also, on our end, really cost effective in terms of the staff time and the financial resources that we put into that versus a lot of the other things that we do to support the presence of the legacy media at our conventions, which of course remains extraordinarily important. So we feel really good about how we were able to conduct the business of our party. We feel very proud about the platform that we were able to build for President Biden and Vice President Harris in our party, and we're proud of the experience that we were able to offer to all of you, to our delegates, our guests, the media who are covering us. One thing I would point out here, since this is the body that will be engaging in setting delegate rules for the next time around, is we are a big event. Right. I mean, we have, I think, almost twice the number of delegates as the Republicans do, and for good reason, because we're the big tech party and believe in engaging and including as many people as possible in our process. And as much as I would love to take all of the credit for our team about the, generally very smooth and easy experience folks had, I do want to really emphasize how much of that was really reliant on the fact that we were in Chicago, which was a city that was uniquely positioned between the largest arena in North America, the density and the proximity of union hotels and so forth, to support an event of our size. And so, if we want to, offer the opportunity for a wide variety of cities beyond just, Chicago and perhaps New York to be able to host our convention, it's, well, when you set the rules, the baseline, the bonus delegates, so on and so forth, I know there's a whole host of considerations that are taken in, so I'm not here to suggest that convention week convenience or logistics should trump any of the many other important factors that go into that, but would just, offer that as a note that should we continue to increase or even maintain delegates, counts and other guests as we go to other cities that are not Chicago, we will, it could be great cities that have lots to offer, but we'll inevitably kind of be in a position where we are making, those trade-offs again, where folks may have to be on a bus for longer, have to, whatever the case may be in those particular cities. So obviously everything is trade-offs, and that'll be a long and considered process, but thought that was just worth mentioning there. But overall, obviously very proud of the work that our team did, very grateful for our leadership and for all of you and your support. So thank you. Mr. Chair.
Anybody have any comments or questions for Mr. Chairman?
I want to say, Alex was very diplomatic. Let me just be Southern. Y'all, we too damn big for these conventions.
Right, that's right.
And we really, it is very, very hard to find a city, and I'm sure the bishop would feel it, that can accommodate us. Mm-hmm. And because you need even more, I mean, cities now are booking up 4 years in advance in terms of their hotels. We really need to revisit, in the future DNC, revisit the size of our conventions, because Republicans can go to some of the smaller cities. We just can't unless you want to stay. You remember you all were in Charlotte, but you stayed in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. Well, if you go to any other smaller markets, it's going to be like that. And Chicago was a very unique situation where we could all be together. But if we continue to grow the size of our convention, it is going to be very, very hard for the DNC to find. It will probably just be Chicago and New York, and we just have the conventions there. So just
before
something to think about.
Before we call on Elaine, one of the things that Alex kind of talked about was the influencers box. That was an additional floor space. And then if you go back and look at the convention and look at the disabilities ramp that they built, which was a really nice, professional ramp that was built for the disabilities community, that just kind of took it out. And then by the time the media zoomed on the floor, It kind of became chaos down
Yeah,
there.
Jamie, that's music to my ears. Some of you remember that back when we were beginning the creation of the 2024 rules, I said we ought to cut the size of this convention. It is simply too big. We can't go to most of the cities in the United States. And there's a very practical reason, which I tell people all the time. Most of the time, the convention looks like just one big celebration of what happens in the primaries. But as we saw this year, and as we may see again at some point, there's no guarantee of that. There's no guarantee that we don't have three strong candidates and we don't come into the convention with someone not having a majority. There's no guarantee that our incumbent president drops out 3 weeks before the opening of the convention, okay? And it's open, and all of a sudden it's a question as to who's going to be the nominee. We might actually one day have to do business on the floor of the convention. And frankly, 4,000 plus delegates, it's just too big. Now, I did go watch the Republicans in 2016, and the reason I went to watch them is I wanted to see on Monday night how the Never Trump move was going to work, and it actually was a lot more powerful than anybody gave it credit for. They sort of did some parliamentary tricks and covered it up, but there was a real movement. And frankly, if people hadn't hated Ted Cruz so much, it might have succeeded, but that was another story. Looking at that, I saw, watching the parliamentary maneuvering, et cetera, on that floor, I thought, well, this is really big and really tough, but guess what? This is at least some sort of doable. Our convention, I don't know how we would do such a thing. I have no idea how we would have a fair and open process on the floor of the convention with more than 4,000 people. It just doesn't work. And so I really, for all the reasons, where we can go, et cetera, I really want to put down a marker that says we have got to shrink the size of this convention substantially. Last time where we ended up on this, we cut out some alternates, right? Which didn't really help us. We are still unwieldy, and God forbid we ever have to actually do business on the floor of our convention.
Anyone else? Madam Chair?
All right, so I guess when you're born and raised in a city where they throw Mardi Gras, which is probably the best holiday of any year, you don't care about crowd sizes. Just the more the better. I have attended every Republican convention since 2004, not as a delegate, but as a member of the media. And I can tell you, Elaine, I disagree. I think our conventions are fabulous. They are just what the soul needs, and they come off so well. This was probably the most joyful occasion that I experienced this year until I celebrate my birthday. And what a remarkable convention. People felt it not just in the arena, but also at home. And it was magical. That's the word you kept hearing, joy, joy, joy. And whether it was creating new spaces on the floor for the influencers or the disability ramp, I mean, we just felt good. We looked good. I get a chance to look at it and comment on it. So I don't know how we can accommodate the size. Maybe we want to stop giving out all of those. What you also did this on the damn committee. You started giving bonus delegates. Yeah, come on, shit. She's a matron of let's give everybody a bonus. If you fall behind, we'll just bonus. So maybe we could look at that. But let's not end what truly becomes the most remarkable part sometimes about this process. It's all of us coming together, celebrating. You know, wearing our best uniforms, costumes, clothes, whatever you want to call it. And maybe there are cities across the country that can accommodate us and not just the big cities. But maybe this is another opportunity for us to go to other regions where people are moving things. We haven't we haven't been down south in a long time, since 2012. So we got time. But thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mignon. Thank you to the entire convention team. You did a phenomenal job. And I know you had to work under some extraordinary pressure in those few weeks, but we also maintained our ballot access because we were able to get everything done in a timely manner. So thank you all. You all are one of the blessings of 2024. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, I'm sorry.
If I can, I think I've worked on every convention since 1992 and served two as CEO. And I would agree with much of what everyone has said. There are probably 6 or 7 cities in the country that can accommodate us because of our size. But the convention, while we get our technical business done, it's also a statement to the world about who we are. Mm-hmm. And what people watch on television or stream these days shows people who the Democratic Party is. We are not the homogenous group of people that goes to the RNC. I always joke that at an RNC convention, you can see the color of the carpet. Mm-hmm. Because everybody's in their seat and it's nice and it's neat and, you know, they don't wear the crazy hats and all that like we do. But at our convention, you see America. The broad diversity of who we are. And I don't know that we accomplish that as well if we start trying to shrink it to a smaller market. It's uncomfortable and it's crowded. Don't try to walk across the floor. I mean, it's just impossible. But at the end, it's who the Democratic Party is, all of us together in one place presenting a unified audience to the world about this is our vision for America. And if that means we gotta be 4,000, we gotta be 4,000. Mm-hmm. And we will find, we'll just be stuck in one of the 6 or 7 cities that can take us. But I think I'd rather that than to present a different image of what the Democratic Party is and who the Democratic delegates who were elected from their states to represent that state. I'd rather be squished in than to be able to see the carpet with a bunch of people who don't look like me.
Mm-hmm. Point well taken. David? Mm-hmm.
There may be ways to accomplish what Donna and Leah were talking about at a smaller number, but my main comment is that the part of the DNC that will bear the burden of a decision to reduce the number of delegates are the state parties. Mm-hmm. And for us to have any conversation about substantially reducing the number of delegates to the convention without first having the support of the Association of the State Chairs, or state committees, strikes me as kind of an exercise in futility, because they're the ones who have to go back and explain to their state, we used to have 100 delegates, but now we've got 80 or something, and 20 of you won't make it. They can still do affirmative action and other things at a smaller number maybe, but they can't deal with the fact that there are fewer slots and everybody up and down the line will complain. So I think if we're serious about this, we need to start with the ASDC and get a recommendation from them as to what's an appropriate size recommendation that would allow more of their states to participate in having a convention, because that's one of the trade-offs, and the other trade-off is more access to the areas of the country that we are frankly ignoring because they're red, but we don't go in there very often, and now we can't even take our convention in, with the exception of places like Texas that's always willing to handle anything of any size, no matter what and whether it makes sense or not. So, but that would be my comment. So,
Chicago welcomes you back, for sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Who? Susan. Susan. Oh, hi, Susan. And then Frank.
Yeah, thank you. Susan Swagger from Virginia. Real quick on, just since we've opened this up for discussion, it's not just even, let's just say we stick with the 4,000 or whatever. As a party chair that spent a very long week, wonderful week, the most tiring week in Chicago, most exhilarating week in Chicago. I was incredibly frustrated on a regular basis by the floor passes that either the campaign and the DNC just randomly gave out to people who then thought that entitled them to a seat in the Virginia delegation. And when you send over celebrities that have some tie to Virginia and they just plop themselves down, or, I've got a state senator or a House member that comes and shows, and I can't kick them out of their seat, even though they're not a delegate. And that was actually probably something that was the most frustrating thing to deal with for my staff. So, even if you whittle down the number, if you're going to keep continuing to give out other stuff to donors and celebrities and activists or whatever, that then we have no control over, like when they, and it's easy to say, well, you just get security and whatever. Well, I'm not going to get security that is going to kick out a member of the Virginia General Assembly. Because we all got to go home and deal with that too. So that is my piece for the day on all of this. As a chair who had a great time, thought everybody did a wonderful job, but that was a little frustrating. Thank you.
Madam Randy and then Frank.
So number one, I just want to say to Alex and to Mignon, I thought they did an incredible job. In a moment of great, I just want to, this is a committee that very much focuses on and has to, the rules and what we need to do to be fair. In my other job, I am focused most of the time on what does it look like and what does it feel like. And frankly, Mignon and Alex, you did an extraordinary job. In a situation where one would not have known, given what had happened in July, what could happen and the craziness that could have happened. And so I just really want to honor the two of you for what you did, period. And the way in which you did it, and just the confidence with which you brought us all together, it was masterful. So thank you. Number two, regardless of what cities can or can't take us, this is the only time most people who are not engaged politically on a 24/7 basis have any experience or connection with the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. Let's be real about this. In this room, we got a lot of people who practice politics as an art form and as a science. If this time, and particularly the roll call, was so fantastic and engaging, and I heard it frequently, the fact that the focus on the floor and the roll call, I'm sure that we can figure out an organizing strategy that if there are things that have to get done, we can get done. We just will need probably more fiber and more Wi-Fi. But it's the only time that people actually engage and see who Democrats are. And the difference, as my sister here said, the difference in terms of when you see the two conventions, it's just obvious. Mm-hmm. And so I actually think we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, that worked this year. Mm-hmm. Of all the things that worked, that worked. Mm-hmm. But I do think we have to think about what else we need to do to detoxify politics for people, so that people don't think it's only a strong man who's going to fix things. Mm-hmm. We are the party of the people, engaging the people in their own agency to try to fight for a better way. So I would actually strongly disagree with limiting a convention and thinking about what we can do in other times to create a way for regular folk to feel like the Democratic Party creates some options and some pathways for their hope instead of for their cynicism.
Thank you, Randy. Frank?
Frank Leone, DC. I just want to make sure we have a marker for the next committee to consider the whole bonus delegate issue. We started awarding bonus delegates to states to encourage them to move back in the primary calendar process and address front loading and or to create regional primaries. And I think now we have a long enough track record that we can evaluate whether that really does any good, and do we want to continue it? Because I think that would be a fairly painless way to reduce the number of delegates without really reducing the diversity or the state delegations if we find it's not really working. And if it is working, then we should keep it. But we did not really take a hard look at it this time, and I think we should next time.
Thank you, Frank. Oh, yes.
You know, one of the things, to Randy's point in terms of creating more opportunities for getting together, because I agree. I mean, Jim Clyburn called me a few weeks after the convention, and he said that he had been to every convention since 1960-something. And he said, I don't want you to get a big head off of this. But this, and I said, I already have a big head. But he said, this is the best convention I have ever attended. And
I would argue that it was the best convention you'd ever attended next to the two that Leah put on before us.
No. Well,
Let's be real clear. Let the record reflect.
I'm just recapping. I'm recapping Jim Clyburn's comment. He said,
I'm keeping my friendship.
No, I understand. Listen, I know that my bread is buttered by the bishop too. I get it. But it was a joyful event. One of the ideas that I had when I first started as chair was, in reading the rules and charters, this idea of midterm conventions. And I had proposed to some folks about a midterm convention, and it was dismissed. But I really do believe the next leadership that is coming in, particularly given that we don't have the White House, should think about going into this midterm election, having a midterm convention. And you could do it then in one of these smaller, because it's a smaller footprint than the larger presidential convention. You could do it in some of these smaller cities and then relegate then your big convention to the bigger cities. So it's just an idea to toy with at this time, so that you spread the love. You can still go to the South and some of these other places, but you can go to with a small footprint. One of the other things I tried to do that we could not have gotten done, but was to announce 2 convention sites, similar to the way that the Olympics does it. So that, again, you give cities the opportunity. Raising money for the convention is a lot. I mean, Alex, how much did you raise in Chicago?
They raised north of $90 million.
$90 million. That's a lot of money. And they say you got 2 years to do it, right? That's a lot of money to raise. But if you can announce 2 sites, then you give a city enough time to build the infrastructure, to do all of the renovations, to make sure that they have the hotels, particularly like a city like Milwaukee. Milwaukee, when we announced that when Tom was chair, Milwaukee had to renovate most of their hotels because they were not full-service hotels. But now you give those cities the opportunities in order to have the time to build up that capacity and raise the money in order to put off a successful convention. So it's just some of the things that I think we just need to, we're in a different age, and we need to think a little differently about how we do this and how we move forward.
David? Oh, you're. Oh, that's okay. Do we have?
I do have general comments, but not on the subject.
Oh, okay.
Madam, it's good to ask this question. We had such great musical talent and so many wonderful performances. Are we able to put that on a CD for Christmas, and maybe we can sell that to raise money to have more forums?
It was trending on Spotify for a long time.
We do.
Well, we need to add somebody to do a voiceover and put it back out there. We can raise a little bit more money for those forums. I'm trying to get to be live across the country.
Well, I'm sure you can
do a GoFundMe, Donna.
So do we have any more comments on the convention itself? Artie?
Yes, Artie Blanco, Nevada, and I would say Las Vegas is a great option, and we shall see what 2028 looks like.
Yeah, we have heard.
And New Orleans is always open.
Jason?
I just want to take a moment to thank the convention staff for all of their work, in particular, working with the Office of the Secretary staff and the state party staff for turning around, with the support of the Convention Rules Committee, a completely new nominating process in a period of like 3 days and crafting something that we could work to put forward our official nominee. So I just want to thank all of those partners because it was a labor of love that we all went into to very quickly figure out how do we nominate someone and not only nominate, how do we actually execute it? And a tremendous thanks to the state parties for their leadership, for they and their teams, from all of our chairs, for helping us navigate that process to a spot where we could get 4,567 delegates to actually vote before convention in about a week or so. Something that is unprecedented, hopefully something we will not have to do again. But truly, it was a remarkable opportunity. And I just wanted to express my heartfelt thanks to all of those who are part of that process with the Office of the Secretary.
Thank you, Jason. Anything else on the convention? Again, Alex, my partner in crime, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So in addition to the convention, we also wanted to set a foundation of expected issue areas with the delegate selection process for the 2025 through 2029 RBC for you to be aware of. Veronica will share the party affairs perspective on possible issues coming down the pike, and she was to be joined by Nick, but she will now be joined by Ramsey Reed to talk through the electoral processes the committee will need to be mindful of next cycle. So I'll turn it over to Veronica.
Thank you, Chair. It feels like a piece of the theme of this meeting has been putting down markers for next cycle, and so I have a few markers for you all from the party affairs perspective, as well as a few of those big flags that Jim mentioned regarding delegate selection plans that I just want to remind on the record here that you all discussed this past cycle with regards to a couple of states. And so the first area that I wanted to flag from a kind of technical perspective of the Party Affairs Office is with regards to state laws. As you know, state parties include a list of relevant state laws in their delegate selection plans. And while these laws are often relatively static, they do sometimes change over time, and they change between chair cycles, they change between the 4-year cycle. And so it's certainly important for both state parties and the DNC to be apprised of these changes. But updating this section can sometimes be a little bit burdensome to state parties, and that's something we encountered this cycle as we were reviewing them. And so keeping that in mind, we thought back to some of the other sections that are very important to state parties and to the folks who read delegate selection plans, but can be a little bit more arduous. And so the things that come to mind are the voter protection section or the demographic data requirements. And in both of those areas, the DNC has come in and supported state parties in collecting that information. We don't say, we have to do it for you. We say, here's a resource. We're here to support you. We're here to help you navigate this. And so just wanted to sort of put on the record here that the DNC and the RBC should consider whether we afford similar resources to state parties next cycle, whether there's something through our legal department that we can get an early jump on in helping them reevaluate those laws, making sure nothing slipped through in some kind of off session that folks didn't notice or between chair cycles, so we can make sure that those state laws are really comprehensive and helpful in the delegate selection plans without being very burdensome to state parties. And I think that this would serve another purpose. As you'll hear a bit from Ramsey about third parties and other issues, this will be really beneficial to the DNC to just have a running tally of these state laws as we move along too. So that is one suggestion. A second area that we wanted to mention for consideration for the next RBC for discussion or clarification within the rules or the temporary call is the process by which delegates' credential access is managed. This is an issue that has arisen over multiple cycles from a few different vantage points and has become a clear need for the committee to address. To be a bit more explicit and clearer here, more recently, this convention, it was unclear whether a delegate's credential could be revoked or the process by which a revocation could be adjudicated, or who had the authority to do so. So not suggesting one way or the other, not even suggesting that a delegate's credential could be revoked. That's for you all to discuss amongst yourself. The call has historically said that coordination for security within the convention hall, premises, and surrounding area is under the authority of the DNC, but state parties are usually entrusted with distributing the credentials. And so we just think that this is a topic that would benefit from y'all's discussion and clarification to make sure that things are really clear and folks have an understanding of that process there. The third issue I wanted to mention is with regards to delegate selection. The third and fourth issue are with regards to delegate selection plans. The first is the signature threshold in New York. I expected Frank to light up at that one, but he didn't. But this is a flag from the past. New York has historically received a waiver to Rule 15A, which limits the signatures required to gain access to the ballot to 5,000 if no other method for appearing on the ballot is provided. New York state election law stipulates that petitions for any office to be filled by the voters of the entire state must be signed by not less than 15,000 of the then enrolled voters of the party, of whom not less than 100 or 5%, whichever is less, of such enrolled voters shall reside in each of 1/2 of the congressional districts of the state. So that is in conflict with 15A, as it doesn't provide an alternative method. You all did communicate to the New York Democratic Party that for 2028 and beyond, it must take provable positive steps to ensure state law complies with our rules. You outlined those steps to them in that letter, and so I just wanted to remind folks of that before the next cycle. Another issue similarly that you all have discussed is with regards to ranked choice voting. And so while we ultimately did not see ranked choice voting play out in any presidential preference contest this cycle, you all did consider the impact of ranked choice voting in presidential preference contests for the state of Maine. In order to minimize confusion for voters late in the cycle, you all approved a motion to allow a one-time waiver to the committee's interpretation of the 15% threshold, which allowed for Maine to proceed with their ranked choice tabulation process. In doing so, similar to the New York State Party, you all communicated to the Maine Democratic Party that for the 2028 cycle, the party should work with the Office of Party Affairs, the Maine Legislature, and the Maine Secretary of State's office to ensure that the state-run process for 2028 and beyond fully complies with Rule 14's viability threshold, or that the Maine Democratic Party must seek an alternate process for determining presidential preference. Furthermore, you stated if the system is not corrected for 2028, Maine could risk infringing upon Rule 14G, which, as you all know, would render their state contest a straw poll, which presidential candidates would not be able to participate in. And so I just wanted to remind folks of that letter as well as we talk about flags for the next cycle. And I think while you all are familiar with Maine state law, it provides a helpful transition here to my friend Ramsey, because ranked choice voting was actually on the ballot across the U.S. in November. And so Ramsey is here today to talk to you about a couple of ballot considerations for 2028, of which ranked choice voting is one of them. And so with that, I will turn it over to Ramsey, and then both of us would be happy to take any questions you would have afterwards.
Thanks, Veronica. And thank you all. I'm gonna quickly run through the ranked choice voting statewide initiatives, and then also sort of recap the independent and third party campaign at the DNC, which it occurred to me as I walked in here and saw you guys. This is actually basically just a regurgitation of a meeting in September in Woodley Park, where there was a Kennedy bus and the Maine Secretary of State speaking, among others. So if you didn't review those minutes, I'll get you up to speed. So there were 7 statewide initiatives. The results are up there. In Alaska, it was incredibly close. There was an effort to try and repeal ranked choice voting that failed very narrowly. It won in Washington, D.C. and lost everywhere else. There was a lot of spending for ranked choice voting, virtually none to oppose it. Pretty much every initiative was between 10-1 and 30-1 spending in favor of ranked choice voting. So I think each of them are their own separate initiatives, but taken together, I think this paints an interesting picture of how voters viewed ranked choice voting when they had an opportunity this past year. It is a lot of money. It is a lot of money. And I think there's, you know, it's something to continue to look into, but it's pretty remarkable, actually. So I think with that, we can move on, come back to questions on ranked choice voting later. And I'll just run through the independent and third party campaign. And I think you will see, obviously, the work that you all do on the delegate selection process and so much other work. It operates within an electoral context, and so that we wanted to make sure that this was something that you all had a good rundown on. So when we started this early in 2024, you know, our basic theory of the case was that there were unique challenges. There were, you know, a field of candidates: RFK Jr., Jill Stein, Cornel West, Claudia Dela Cruz, Libertarian candidate, all pursuing ballot access largely on a 50-state basis. And we're doing so with the support, explicit and hidden, many times, support of GOP donors and groups. And early on in this year, it was very clear that we were in a better position in a two-way race than a multi-way race. So we decided to take them head on. You know, in fact, it was actually Mary Beth Cahill who decided to take them head on. But we had a great group of people. Bob Lenhard oversaw the legal team, former general counsel at AFSCME, chairman of the FEC. Nick Bauer was doing a ton of work on this project. Liz Smith oversaw the communications work. It was a bunch of very heavy hitters. And you know, what we tried to do was make sure that we were in a position to hold them accountable on ballot access when they weren't following the rules, which happened a lot. And we wanted to make sure that we understood the best possible impacts and risks with the electorate. It's a part of the electorate that's fairly specific and not one that you can get a really good sense at on sort of the baseline data and research. And then we wanted to take them head on and define and chip away at them every day. You know, knowing where we wanted to go was really important to be able to do this on a day-to-day basis. So I'll just run through some of the things I think we learned and some of the things I think that are important for you all to consider and keep in mind as we go forward. Jared, if you move on. So just first on a ballot access standpoint, this is sort of the baseline thing that all of these candidates were trying to do. And we saw them absolutely, you know, just ignore campaign finance law. They ran ballot access operations out of GOP consulting firms. They used, you know, billionaire donors to fund super PACs to do it and to contribute those signatures directly to the campaigns. They tried to create, you know, new parties that they claimed were parties, but then argued a month later that they weren't parties when it benefited them to. They tried to buy off existing third parties in states that would get them ballot access. You know, in one case, I think the Kennedy campaign, it was reported, had offered a $30,000 consulting contract to the chair of a minor party in Florida to in exchange for control of the party. So they basically stopped at nothing. And so, you know, as we look ahead, we really need to make sure that the states, the administrators understand what's happening, what the playbook is, how this works, that they will, you know, not on a rolling basis turn in signatures to allow the states to verify them within the resources that they have, but actually they will, you know, collect 5 times as many as they need, wait till the last minute, drop them, overwhelm the states, make sure that they don't actually have a verification system. They you know, will use, you know, billionaire Republican donors to fund dark money groups that are doing this. And so states have rules around ballot access and policy interests, and some of those requirements for ballot access probably aren't achieving what the states think that they are. So that's something that everyone needs to be eyes wide open about. If you move on to the next one, Jared, just in terms of understanding the risks and thinking about it. So just in terms of what happened, at the outset, RFK Jr. support was pulling more from Dems than it was from Trump. Over time, that changed. And so, you know, as I think we're thinking about, you know, broadly, the royal we are thinking about coalition building, you really have to keep in mind that there are heterodox candidates, and you have to be able to evaluate how they appeal to voters on a different basis than we traditionally do. We saw the Republicans really consolidate around Jill Stein, This was sort of crystallized when Jay Sekulow represented the Green Party in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And so at that point, we really, took her on with more aggressive voter education, but not before that. These candidates, have real challenges in breaking through, and also they don't have a path to victory. And so you have to be really mindful of the trade-off in when you take them on and how, and whether it's, valuable enough. And so when we look ahead, every dynamic of every cycle, the matchup's going to be different. There's going to be different candidates, but you really need to do the research early. You have to have the dedicated, data tracks on it so that you can know, where your risks are and set yourself up accordingly. And that's going to be something that we sort of view as like a new normal for how Republicans will try and manipulate the system. So if you jump to the last slide here, in terms of the communications work, so at one point, obviously, there was a Kennedy bus at a DNC RBC meeting, but eventually he was exposed as, being MAGA. He was, took on really conservative views of key positions, but that was really only because we were watching and letting people know. Otherwise, it wasn't really getting coverage, and obviously there was a lot that exposed his unfitness and erratic behavior, mostly animal themed, to be honest, but plenty of other topics. Jill Stein, despite her incredibly consistent communication, lost her moral high ground when she refused to call Assad and Putin war criminals. And she had a running mate who supported abortion bans, had transphobic comments, and that kind of stuff, the left only hears about if you go out and communicate it. So we really, focused on knowing what we wanted to do, who we wanted to talk to, and we're very careful in terms of how we engaged. And I think that has a lot to do with the work that this committee does around delegate selection planning and around coalition building. So much of the conversation here is like, how do we make ourselves more appealing and accessible to more people? And clearly, we have work to do to expand the coalition. And these are parts of the voters that we need to go get. And there are other candidates fighting for them. It's not just Republicans. It's Republicans through other vehicles. And so we should keep it in mind, and hopefully this gives this group of people who do just an insane amount of work on behalf of the party and putting our next nominee in a great position to win a good idea of what to expect next time.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. It didn't break. Thank you. I agree. The information you just provided should be part of any larger forensic analysis of what happened and how we process this electoral cycle. I just want to be a little cautious when we talk about how Republicans tried to boost some of the candidates running either in the Democratic primary or in the general election. And it is clear to me that they had a strategy, and we still don't know if it worked. So I would hope that we would continue to look into it, because there's a lot there we have to figure out of what happened in 2024. But at times, as you well know, not the DNC, but some of our sister committees, our allies and our friends have also boosted Republican candidates in their primaries. So maybe we're saying something loud, but we don't know the impact of what we're saying. But everybody's playing in each other's backyard now. The cesspool is so dirty. And the amount of money in American politics, I mean, it has just, I'm shocked, but I'm not surprised. In 2020, we spent $6 billion combined, and it's upwards of $16 billion and counting. But this problem that we're experiencing now, and a billionaire, I tried to play Mega Millions. a couple of days ago. It was at 500. I figured I get a couple more dollars, maybe I can get a commission and be in charge of whether or not we put waste on Mars, visit Mars. I didn't win, but I will keep trying. But the money is, and we have to assess our money too. We had a lot of little donors, a lot of small donors, and we had a lot of wealthy people. And I just hope that when we start doing our analysis and we can open up our thought processes and go outside the boxes and the walls we put around ourselves, that we take a look at everything. And everyone should allow this information to be at the table of our conversation about the future of our party and the future of our country, because now they are both tied together. But thank you for your presentation, and I hope everybody can get a copy of it.
Elaine?
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned, Ramsey, and one of the things I think we should put on our list for looking at is, it surprised me to discover how easy it was to declare yourself a political party and get and use the law to get ballot access. And interestingly enough, in talking about this, Congresswoman AOC brought up a good point. A political party fields candidates all up and down the ballot. You field candidates for county commissioner, you field candidates for House, for Senate, and for president. You know, a real political party isn't a political party that just is playing in the presidential race. And so I think, I mean, a smart lawyer, I mean, Bob Bauer, or one of the guys we have in our side, ought to start looking at this state by state, where the definition of a political party is so completely loose that next time around somebody else can get in here and put a spoiler candidate on the ballot. It's also something that, frankly, the Republicans might want to also, it might be in their interest as well. So I think that this is something that we should try, put on the list to try and clean up.
Quick question, and pardon me if you already addressed this. Do we know how many states in which a third party was the margin of victory, particularly in the battleground states?
No states this year.
No states.
Yeah, which I think in some ways is a measure of success.
As usual, there are numbers floating around out there. Glad to hear you're authoritative.
That's not on the presidential, but in the Pennsylvania Senate race, it was.
In the Pennsylvania Senate, yeah, and I think Arizona had a pretty substantial Senate margin too.
Add them all up in some of these states, and they didn't make the margin of victory in some of these states. Luis?
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, also Ramsey, I think to Elaine's point, for example, in Arizona, the No Labels Party was easily able to collect 40,000 signatures to get ballot recognition, and that I know there was an effort through the DNC and through multiple partners to challenge that recognition based on the finance of how those signatures were collected. But I really advise to the further review that maybe it wasn't the presidential or the major Senate, but we had legislative races that were impacted through minor candidates. We had up and down the ballot, and I think it's worth the DNC as a whole, and hopefully to minimize legal fees here, to really look at the 2026 election and look at what's coming down the pipeline for 28. But we have to be very, very, very deliberate on maybe it's not the attention. We've been a part of a lot of committees in trying to fundraise for these legal bills, and it is an expensive proposition if you're not a DGA or a DS or some major. So legislative races get put on the chopping blocks, and county races, if we don't just really focus, and we need legal assistance to try to make this, where the arguments are the same in trying to freedom of association or some other points that we have to really make it a point, but we've been left behind in other races, and it's not until the presidential that we get like attention on these matters, and now we're just running pretty late in the game. So there are efforts. The Republican Party and the legislature pretty much changed the rules for the Green Party constantly to allow, they lose recognition, but they're able to gain where their ballot signature, because if you are a new party, your ballot qualification is actually lower than the remaining recognized parties. And so that is a loophole, and I do think that that is the model that they've applied in other states, is this notion of a new party. But I think there's a number of different races that we need to analyze of where the third-party candidate was a major detractor.
I think that the point that Luis raises is really good, and well, we obviously did this because of the presidential campaign, but it became very clear that this needs to be a part of what the DNC does year in, year out. Like, this is you can't support, state legislative and congressional in all 50 states unless it's something that, like, you really, put into the day-to-day operation and dedicate some focus on that consistently. So that's certainly a recommendation that we have going forward for the next chair.
Anyone else?
Madam Chair, one thing I would add, and I think in the analysis as we're going through this, one of the commonalities that I'm finding is that I think we can create some economies of scale. And one of the things that I'm writing in my exit memo to the next chair, is I really do believe across particularly the federal committees, we need to think about the synergies that we have and the activities that we all replicate. I think on this third-party front is one area. I think voter protection is another area. On the polling is another area. We are spending tens and millions of dollars in the democratic ecosystem replicating various things. So why is the D-TRIP, the DS, and the DNC all doing polling in Pennsylvania where we could consolidate it in a series of one poll and save millions of dollars across our committees? On the research fund side, many times the people who are running for presidential, before they ran for president, were running for the House and running for the Senate. So on the research side, being able to work together to consolidate on that research. And maybe the DNC is the conduit to hold all of that, since we are more of a 4-year and they're more of a 2-year. But then they pay into the DNC's cadre to do these services. I just think we got to be smarter about how all of these things. There are a lot of consultants who are getting a lot of money because of all of the duplication that we have in our system. And I really do think we need to take a long-term strategic look at how we eliminate the duplication, be much more efficient and effective, and save some money in the process as well.
I think that's a fair point, Mr. Chairman. Yes, David?
I don't know if we are still on discussing Ramsey and Veronica's report or whether you moved to general comments. When you move to general comments, I have some. So if I'm ahead of time.
Yes, why don't you just jump in with your generals?
All right, thank you. So
Thank you, Ramsey.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
We survived a surprise situation very well in 2024, but I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it could happen again in a different form, and that one of the things that we should look at in the next cycle is all of the questions that can come up if the presumptive nominee suddenly is no longer a factor, whether it's because they've had a health incident, they've retired. Does it matter whether they do it 2 weeks before the convention or 3 months before the convention, partway through the cycle, and not? And I think that may even be an appropriate subject for some kind of working group, just to generate the questions that could come up. The one that jumped off the page at me at the time that we were experiencing the real-time event is, as a very technical matter, I think automatic delegates probably should have been able to vote on the nomination if there had been a contest. We interpreted around that or did something else. I'm not saying we did anything improper. We were creative about doing it, but the reality is, under the strict statement we had made to automatic delegates originally, if somebody got enough pledged delegates to win the nomination on the first ballot, automatic delegates could thereafter vote. And if well, I guess I am an automatic delegate, but I think the congressional automatic delegates in particular probably would think that if we were having to replace the nominee, that they should have a voice in the process. And maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, but the one thing that was not immediately understandable, I think, to the general public is why, well, let me rephrase it. It was probably understandable in the context. In a situation in which we did not, we have a presumptive nominee that's no longer present in the process, but is not able to endorse a candidate, you know, say a health event, they're just out of the picture. It's not obvious why a bunch of delegates pledged to that person should decide who the successor is, as opposed to some more general pool, because that group of people were selected realistically primarily for how well they would support a particular candidate and a particular view. So I don't have answers to those questions, but I think that's really a fairly significant thing that is better answered when there's no oxes to be gored than it is in a real-time motion.
David, if I might address that a little bit, because when they asked me to serve as chair, the environment that Alex and I were walking into was Gaza. It was immigrants or migrants being shipped into Chicago. It was the theory that the president at the time was too old. So we had all of that at our backdrop. And I think your point, and I don't want to get into much discussion about it, but I think your point about having a committee or a small group that kind of thinks through what we termed, quite frankly, was the what ifs.
Yeah.
So we went into this conversation, and, you know, for public knowledge, we went into the conversation with what if. But it was never what if the president switched, but it was what if around all of the things you just described. And the automatic delegates was a source of, you know, grave contention for a few of us that met around this question, because, I mean, you know, we're talking about a presidential now and, you know, not having a nominee, and that was, to me, disenfranchisement. But I think your point is so valid, and we should definitely take it in consideration. I don't know what body takes that into consideration, but I can assure you, we had to think about it, and I won't front off the people that had to think about it with me, but we had to think about that question.
It's not only the presidential, it's really a case of who is going to interpret the will of voters who can't be present in the room.
That's right.
I think a good argument could be made that elected officials may be better positioned to do that than delegates pledged to a single candidate, or at least should be in the mix. Despite, I think there are generally good reasons for the positions we have taken on automatic delegates not voting on the first ballot where the voters have had a chance to speak. But we're now talking about a situation where there is, who's the proxy for the mass of people. So I think those tires ought to be kicked, and what would the type of thing, you called it what if. When I was in litigation practice with the corporate clients, we would say rude Q&A. What are the rude questions you're going to get, and what answers are you going to have for those? Then second, I think a couple of things about that I thought we did in the end really well was our primary calendar deliberations and all the transparency that Jamie forced on, not forced, but endorsed in that process. And I think it has led to regular live streaming of these meetings, which I think is a good idea. I do get feedback from people who can follow what we do, and on days like today, we end up discussing things that are not quite as nerdy as people think rules meetings are. So two things, I hope we will use a similarly transparent process going forward, and that we will decide the states earlier. We were delayed this time by the need to have consultation with the White House. That will not be a factor next time, and I think we should try to decide them earlier. I think to some extent I don't know whether going forward we should say, let's just use the same resolution we used last time with the considerations it said, or whether we should rethink what the considerations are that we want for the early states. The focus on battleground states also led us to change a policy that we'd had for years of trying to have only small states up front so that they were approachable and we got a retail view. We went to larger states, and I personally expect that we will see more larger states apply next time in light of the fact that we let Michigan go up front. So we may need to have a preliminary, we need to think about whether we want to cut to the chase and go to the calendar, or whether we want to think about the criteria for the calendar. But that said, it was I thought it tremendously, and as many of you will recall, I was forced to watch it on TV because of the COVID exposure from close personal friends. So I watched the thing on television, and it was a very uplifting experience. I mean, it was a tremendous advertisement for the work our state parties do, the diversity of things that we're engaged in. It was worth doing for that sake. Even if we were just rubber stamping the same end result, it would still be worth getting those presentations, even from states that had realistically no chance of getting the upfront status. So I endorse doing that again. And then I think this may be my last one. I do think that we need to continue to clarify the RCV situation. Even though it did not do well at the polls, I think number one, it will continue to come up, and number two, at least in my state, Maine is being used as, oh, the DNC improved Maine, so we just need to do whatever Maine does. So the bills get introduced. They're not going to pass in my state because I think we know that Maine was not workable. But if we don't want to someday be having just a bunch of confrontations with state legislatures, and we can't do that very often, who have charted their own course, we need to give some guidance. And I also think we need to give some guidance in connection with its use in party elections. I just did in my home state, or served as parliamentarian for 3 sets of meetings where there were relatively small groups of people where they chose to use RCV for the first time in generating lists of multiple nominees. And it worked really pretty well in all 3 cases, but it did highlight the types of things that can come up and surprise you, namely what happened when we had a tie. As it turns out, a tie among the 2 candidates who had 0 votes, but under the rules that had been set up for RCV, you had to figure out which one of them would have their 0 votes redistributed to the next round before you went to the next round. But then we had a legitimate tie. But if people are going to start using it in delegate elections, and we saw some of that come through last time, we may need to kick the tires a little bit more on how is it appropriately used in delegate selections to assure equal opportunity. We kind of took people at face value that they said, yes, we'll take care of our affirmative action and other obligations as we implement this, but I don't know that we've done any after action on it. And that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Go ahead.
I think I was up before you.
Mo, go ahead. Mo, sorry.
I just wanted
Elaine?
to
Okay, sorry.
comment on the point about what do we do when we lose a candidate for one reason or another. I did a short first draft of history following this called How Kamala Harris Won the Nomination in 32 Hours. Okay, and with the help of some people in this room who I interviewed, I tried to figure out what actually happened. And interestingly enough, there's a lot more legitimacy to what happened than certainly the Republicans and others are talking about. And essentially what happened was in a very, and this is a function of the information age, in a very short period of time, state parties started polling their delegations. What state parties used to do in person in the old days when they gathered in, Chicago or Los Angeles, and they would actually do a person-to-person poll, state parties started polling. I remember Susie sending me these urgent emails, Elaine, fill out your ballot, and I didn't know what she was talking about. And then I finally opened it, and it was, are you for Kamala Harris or someone else? Okay, so what happened in that very short period of time is two things. First of all, there's no other candidate. And secondly, the actual delegates, so the people who would be making the decision if we were in fact already gathered in Chicago and on the floor, the actual delegates were participating and letting their voices be heard. Different states did it different ways. I know in Maryland they had a big meeting and people actually voted on it. They actually took a vote on it. So ironically, in the information age, what happened was you had a proxy for what used to happen in the old days when you didn't have a nominee as you got to the convention hall, which was you polled delegations and state by state you figured out. So I'm just putting that out there, and I'm sure there'll be, I'll do more writing on this. I'm sure there's other party historians and political scientists who will do more writing on this, but it does strike me, David, that a starting point is, yes, of course, the automatic delegates, but they play a big role in the state parties anyway. So people wanted to know, where's your governor at, where's your senator at, et cetera. And the state parties end up being the unit, right, which is the organizing unit. And I think we've had this conversation and other things about delegation chair, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is what I saw, at least when I reconstructed those 32 hours, was the state parties were in fact the organizing units of the convention, and they had the legal authority. I remember telling the New York Times, they said, well, how can we figure this out? I said, you guys used to poll delegates. How about polling delegates again? They're the people who make the decision. Everybody else had crazy ideas like having, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton sit down together and pick the nominee and stuff like this. And it was like, wait a minute, guys. The delegates are already elected. So I think we need to look at what happened, right? Look at the allegations of illegitimacy around it, which I think are actually much less serious than some people think, and begin from there, David, in looking at this process.
If I could just make two responsive things. Yeah. One, it's a different situation when the vacancy happens before the convention and you don't have a sitting president, because you don't know who number 2 is. So that sudden polling by all the people pledged to the person who's just withdrawn it's a lot harder. And second, I think it varies by state, the extent to which they even cared what their elected officials thought. Some cases they do, in some cases they probably weren't invited to the meeting because they didn't have a vote. So anyway, that's others.
Did you publish your analysis anywhere?
Yeah.
Could you send us the link to it?
Yeah, it's on the Brookings site, and it's about 2,000 words. It's a first draft of history. I'm quoted some of the people in this room in there.
Thank you. The reason I ask is because some people, and you've mentioned one of them, said the DNC should have figured out a way to do a primary after that withdrawal.
That's why I wrote this.
To me, to me that reflects a lack of understanding what a primary is.
Absolutely.
Thanks. David brought up the primary calendar, and I couldn't agree more that I think was one of the crowning achievements of this RBC. Wasn't easy. A lot of pain came along with it, a lot of hot tempers at times, and that's just in this room, let alone what was going on out there. And first of all, Jim and Mignon, just to add my congrats And thanks to the two of you for the way you navigated that, we showed we could do something pretty historic and pretty monumental. And since we're sending notes here to the next chair and RBC, I would hope that they would stay committed to what we did, and continuing that work and leaning on the two of you in some way to help navigate it as we do this in an open primary season. Let me say, I think some of the work that we did in retrospect looks even more prescient today. And the election results validate it. The idea of creating a framework at the beginning, rather than a list of criteria for states, but a framework of what we wanted the early window to look like and the message that we wanted to send with it, and that message would reflect our commitment to inclusivity, our commitment to diversity, our commitment to running good elections, and frankly, getting the Democratic message into battleground states as early in the process as possible. That really, really, really rings true today, more than it did even back then. I would just remind the next chair and RBC, a few things pissed me off in terms of narrative this cycle about our work. Then this was Biden's primary calendar, because we did a ton of work before we heard one peep from the White House. Everything we just talked about was done in advance, and it's going to be more important in an open primary. I cannot overestimate or overstate the importance of getting into battleground states early. I take David's point. We've had this conversation quite a bit over the cycle, right? There's some trade-offs. But when we look at how this election played out, the sooner we get in front of those voters, the better. And the other thing I hope they do that we did was commit to doing this process every cycle. The more we can reiterate that, because next cycle's battleground states may be different than this cycle's battleground states. But getting rid of any sort of automatic waiver, getting rid of any sort of just belief that what we did last time is what we're going to do next time. I hope next time the calendar looks different, because that would tell me that the next RBC is making a choice based on what works for next cycle. If my time on the RBC is done and I'm to talk about what I'm most proud of, it would be those two things. It would be us changing the process enough to say that we got in front of more voters early on, reflecting our values, and that we committed to going through this process every time to show that we are not a static organization. So, future chair, if you're in the room or watching, future RBC members, please, I hope you take that to heart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of notes that I would say. One, for what happened this time, I would simply note that under the rules that we adopted as a Convention Rules Committee, anyone could have put their hat in the ring to become the nominee. So it was not a closed process. There was the possibility intentionally in the rules that allowed for a certain period of time for anyone to say, I'm running, and then for them to whip their votes or whatever they needed to do. So I think that's important for us to note so that we don't fall into the notion that it was somehow a coronation. But it was an open process and people had to do their own work. I think another point that needs to be made as we do the retrospective is the timing of when the switch happened, because it happened after the primaries were done. It would have been a completely different construct if the president had made a decision in January before there was a first primary. It would have been a completely different way of of what rules we may have passed, what shifts we may have made. And so as we look at potentially a quote-unquote fix, then I think the timing of these things matters, whether it's before the primaries happened, in the middle of primary season, or after the primaries have concluded. All of them have different markers. If I were to give a note to the chair, and this is falls in the rather parochial, but serving on rules and bylaws, I think we would all agree, is a tremendous honor. We spend a lot of time. There are lots of meetings, which also makes it very expensive for us. And so my note to the chair would be to consider the possibility of some sort of travel stipend, hotel room, something, because without that, some of us are not represented by organizations who will pay our fees, who will pay our bills. We are coming out of our own pockets with travel and all of that. So people say, oh, this is great. Yeah, I got to add this as a budget in my personal expenses. And that necessarily constrains the kind of people that you have on the Rules Committee, because everybody can't do that. And so I would want the incoming chair to seriously at least think about how you might level that playing field somewhat to make sure that we are attendant to. I think the Rules Committee has more meetings than anybody. And I think, as Jim said at the beginning, we were meeting once a month for some period of time. And for those of us who do not fall in the category of the independently wealthy or elite, searching on, there's no such thing as cheap tickets anymore. So trying to navigate all of that, I think it's, folks deserve a feather in their cap for being able to get to all the meetings. And I would encourage the incoming chair to look at that seriously so that we can ensure that we have as broad a pool as possible to serve.
Thank you, Bishop. I want to go back to, I think, a conversation that was going on between Elaine and David and put some context around the switch a little bit. So on July 21st, 1:41 p.m., President Biden decided he was not going to run. At 1:50, he endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris, at which time his operation changed to her operation. But what was difficult about that period was where the convention sat. And at the time, we had a lot of prospective names floating out there. I got a call from former Secretary of Labor, Alexis Herman. She began to channel Ron Brown. She said, Mignon, if you go into this convention and you're not unified, it will be a mess. It doesn't matter who's in there.
And former co-chair of this committee.
And former co-chair. She also said what Ron Brown would say is figure out how you can get unity before you get to the convention. At which time, I picked up the phone. I called our chairman. I said, Mr. Chairman, you must call every one of the prospective candidates to see what their intentions are going to be so that we will know what type of convention we are preparing. So I wouldn't have to know how many thousands of people we would have to bring in to help us prepare for that convention. Jamie called every last one of them.
Everyone.
Everyone. There was only one person that was in the middle of a crisis of his own that did not commit. But we knew going in that day that the prospectives had decided not to run. We weren't blinded by that. We knew that because our chairman decided to call and have a conversation with them.
And Madam Chair, I'm going to give context. It was almost as if I was chasing the VP's call. Because when I talked with the prospective folks, all of the names that were out there who we knew were possibly interested, they said, well, I just got off the phone with the VP and I pledged my support to her. So it was, so this idea that, the VP was coordinating, no, she worked her ass off. She got on that phone and she worked the process to secure the nomination. And she talked to folks who could have been rivals for that nomination. And she got them to, and this may have never been out on the record. And so what Mignon and I are telling you, probably just the two of us, along with a few staff, know this. So, and we knew that we also had a process because we had a ballot access deadline
Yes.
with Ohio.
We did
Now,
not have our chairs who became a vice presidential candidate.
Exactly right. And, and there are pundits out there who say, well, that's a fake deadline and this and that. Listen, folks, we know how the Republicans operate. If you're going to think they're going to do the right thing about something, ask the North Carolina people right now whether or not Republicans in the legislature are doing the right thing, right? And so we knew that was our hard ballot deadline, because what we knew was if the presidential nominee was not on the top of the ticket, it would have down ballot ramifications. Because, some people just go out to vote for the president, and then they'll happen to vote for everybody else on the down ballot ticket. We had a battleground Senate race there. We had congressional races that could have determined the majority in the House there. So we knew that we had to have that ballot access. And so that was our hard deadline. And so we were constricted in that process. We knew we had to do it by early August.
And we didn't have the rules of the convention set yet.
That's exactly right.
Because we had met 4 days before
That's right.
the
That's
switch.
exactly right.
That's
To
right.
determine the rules, we had to come back to then determine how we were going to navigate post-switch.
That's
But in
right.
terms of the ballot access issue and all of the other rules, we'd met because none of us knew the switch was coming. We had met before, I think it was the 17th.
It was on it was on the 18th, and
Yes, 'cause-
credentials met on the 21st, and the switch, or the president stepping back, occurred before the 2 p.m. gavel of the credentials committee.
Credentials met on the 21st,
That's correct.
exactly 12 minutes after we were notified
Yes. That's
right. That's
of the
correct.
withdrawal.
Well,
And we had a script, which was very nicely written,
Right.
which said you are all confirmed to be delegates for
And I just want to go back to David. Now,
Biden, exactly.
I really do believe that we need to reevaluate, particularly, as Leah mentioned, these time frames for when these things happen, post-primary and all, because that moment was really, listen, I was unnerved. I don't get unnerved very often, but I was unnerved at this prospect, because you had a lot of people chirping and talking about all of these other things and creations and setting up expectations, and then we had the reality of what our rules said, right? And so one of the things I think is very, very clear to what David said, we need a what-if box for all of these things, and they have to be very thoughtful and deliberative in terms of making sure that if it happens in these certain time frames, then we do this. But we also need to be thinking about those automatic delegates, because it would have been very, very scary. And this is not to disparage our convention delegates, but I think about some of our new delegates who, so many great new delegates with a lot of energy stepping into the Democratic Party process for the very first time. To put the weight of deciding who our nominee is solely on those folks, and not have the folks who've been around, have seen all of these processes and having that wisdom and experience, that is, just as chair, that was a very, very scary moment to
That's
see where we
Elaine's
were.
whole theory
Yes.
about automatic delegates are the senior class
Yes.
in high school. They're the ones that have an idea of what goes on.
It's a very scary thing, and I would just say to this committee, as you all think, and I'm sure many of you will probably be on the next RBC, and maybe we chat about starting a process even before we get that, so that the ball can start rolling. We really need to think through this process, because we had the perfect scenario of what happened. A little slip here or there, we could have had the worst case scenario, and that could have been the worst convention ever. Since the 1960s, it could have been the worst convention in the history of this party, and only with a little movement here or there. And I think we really have to be thoughtful and deliberative about how we do this going forward.
So just a brief comment, if
Yes,
I may.
please, Mr. Chair.
So this is something that we've implied in this discussion, but that we've not actually said out loud, is that something that we forget about the whole small d democratic process is that the first thing it requires is somebody who wants to be a candidate with the intellectual horsepower and the emotional commitment, the fire in the belly. That's what went on in that process that you conducted, Mr. Chair. You determined that people had already indicated they did not have the fire in the belly to take this on. That's been very little acknowledged in the discussion so far. Secondly, at the end of the convention, this committee got the highest compliment that I thought we could get, which is you came up to me and said, the rules worked.
Yes, they work. And we approved those rules, and that was another thing. The fact that we could tell the American people and our Democratic colleagues and others that we approved them in September of 2022, and that every step along the way, we had open meetings and conversations. And to Leah's point about compensation or giving us some frequent flyer miles or whatever, it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve on this committee, because I've seen over the past several cycles, I've seen a determination to make this party the most active and inclusive party. We have to remember, as we tell our story and tell the story of 2024, that we may have fallen short in terms of the votes, but our values and the values that we bring to this conversation, those values should never change. And for that reason and that reason alone, I have kept my head up high. I know it hurts to lose. I know we wanted to do our very best. But in the period we had and the fight and struggle we waged, I feel that we should applaud those who were a part of this journey with us. The volunteers, the activists, the donors, and the delegates. They all deserve our gratitude as well.
Here.
Amen. Any other comments from Luis and then Frank?
Yeah, very quickly then, I wanted to say that our nomination process was transparent, fair, and equitable. And the idea that the Vice President of the United States stepped in for the President of the United States shouldn't be weird. I mean, that's what Kamala Harris was nominated to do in 2020. That's what she was elected to do by 81 million Americans in 2020. And the Biden-Harris campaign was what the campaign was this spring. So everything that everyone has said is correct. It was an open process. Other people could get involved. But the only, frankly, the most logical conclusion was for Kamala Harris to step in for Joe Biden, and thank goodness she did. The other thing is I just want to make sure people recognize the absolutely unprecedented circumstances of, number one, the presidential candidate stepping down, and number two, dealing with the Ohio deadline. And either of those challenges were big. But to handle both of them in such a professional, smooth way, I think the DNC leadership, DNC staff, this committee, Rules Committee, Convention Committee, especially Veronica Martinez-Ramon and her staff, really deserve a heck of a lot of credit. And Elaine, in your second draft of history, I hope you recognize that.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, first I want to thank the chairman for this appointment to serve on this committee, and it is at your will and also of the honor. But I want to share that story because I've been involved in Democratic politics for 30 years and 16 walking into a county Democratic Party. My first unit of being elected as a PC every single year. I have to get elected as a state committee member every 2 years. I am accountable to the folks that really put the trust to be a member of this Democratic Party. I want to go back to an issue that I have consistently mentioned throughout my 4 years on this committee, is that we elect 200 members of the permanent DNC members that will have the largest voting group of the next chair, for example. We haven't really gone through a real deep dive on how each of those 200 members divided, apportioned through the states get elected in a consistent, fair, and transparent way. I am not saying that, or an accusation that there is a problem, but in order to fulfill transparency for new people like me. It shouldn't take me 30 years. This is my first role in this committee. But in order for somebody that shows up at the Democratic Party tomorrow and wants to get elected as a DNC member, whenever that time gets available, that process should be easily, it shouldn't be hidden in bylaws. It shouldn't be hidden in different process. And I feel that the only way to get that done is if we look at attaching the review of that process either through our delegate selection, because eventually those DNC members become delegate members of that process, or figuring out a better way to make sure that there is transparency and folks just get the opportunity to sit at this table faster. None of us should be sitting at the DNC for 20, 30, 40 years. It is a privilege, and many of us, there's great members that do serve, but there's also a party that is growing and is dynamic, that is coming, and in order for us to kind of include them, we have to look at our process to how to get here. And I do believe we spend a lot of dynamic, the chairman spends a lot of time in appointing 75 members of his slate that gets recommended to the DNC to just make sure that the DNC looks like America. He appoints a lot of members of different groups. That should be done in our states. But it is a process that many times I believe that nobody's paying attention, and there is just a lack of inability to how do these elections actually occur in the states. And I just want to make it a point that we look at it more closely. I am not saying that any of the states are not doing it in a democratic way. They're doing it adhering to their bylaws, but it should be easier, and I just think that that is a process that needs to be evaluated.
Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you very much, Mignon. And members, that concludes our agenda for today. We covered a lot more territory than I think anyone thought we were going to. And that's one of the purposes of this meeting, is to have an open opportunity, while memories are still fresh, to get things on the record. Does anyone have any questions or announcements before we go? With no additional questions, I want to extend our gratitude once more to our parliamentarian, Helen McFadden. You have no idea how good she is. I get that guidance, and so does Mignon. To our party affairs team, Veronica Martinez-Roman, Aaron Bucola and Rick Boylan. Yeah. Also, thank you to the DNC leadership, Sam Cornell, Roger Lau, Monica Guardiola, Mary Beth Cahill, Nick Bauer in absentia, along with the Secretary's office, our DNC counsel, Andy Levine, Ramsey Reed, our court reporter, and our ASL interpreter. If there are no objections, this meeting is now adjourned.